Hello, Forgers, and welcome to Metasight, a podcast where we discuss SolForge Fusion mechanics, meta, and maneuvers. I'm your host, Ben, also known as Ankh, and today joining me we have...
I'm Nathis. Hey, nice to meet you, and I'm Sam.
Yep, we have Sam back for another episode. Today we are continuing our four-part review of Battle for Whitefang Pass, and this is our final faction, which is Nekrium. In this series, we're going over all the cards. Since we've had the opportunity to play with them for the past few months, we figured we'd give our opinions now. It's a pretty good time to do it. So what is your thoughts just going into Nekrium before we get too far in?
So I'm excited. So Nekrium obviously was one of the more powerful ones in set 1, so this was something where I know I had high expectations going into set 2, so I'm excited to go over the creatures and and all the cards and just kind of see where we feel.
Yeah, we definitely got some cool stuff in Nekrium. We lost a few critical things, but we'll talk about that a little bit later.
For sure.
And as always, with this series, we want to take a little bit of an objective approach to how cards are statted. So when we're talking about creatures, we're going to use the combat tactician as sort of our baseline. The way that the developers balance the cards is that they give the first level of a card 12 points of stats to work with, then it comes up to 18 at level 2, and then 27 at level 3. So based on that math, we can kind of determine how strong they consider an ability to be, and that'll also help sort of gauge whether it's got a good ability or if the penalty we're taking is worth the stats that we're gaining. So without further ado, let's get into it. And we'll go ahead and start with the bride herself, the Bride of Frankenbaum. Sam, do you want to kick us off with the Bride of Frankenbaum?
Sure, let's do it. So Bride of Frankenbaum is a 4/4 scientist, and the level 1 has Slay. You may play a level 1 spell for free. The level 2 is a 7/7 that has Slay. You may play a level 1 or 2 spell for free. And then the level 3, Bride of Frankenbaum, is an 11/11 with Slay. You may play a spell for free. So looking at stats, the level 1 is -4, the level 2 is -4, and the level 5 is -5. Or sorry, the level 3 is -5. So as a result, you're definitely losing a lot of stats in order to get the Slay ability. So like, I feel like, is that something, where do you feel on that, Ben?
I feel like it... So I've had a lot of thoughts on this. I think if you can line it up right and at least trade with something, it's okay, but I think you have to have a pretty high density of spells in your deck and ones that you're okay playing post-combat.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a lot of staying power is a big problem with it, I think.
I agree 100%. Like, when I first saw this card, I think I was so excited. I was like, oh my god, we have another Uranti Elementalist, basically.
Yeah.
And then I played it for the first time, and I was just like, oh, this is not killing stuff when I need it to. And it's just like, you can't guarantee a spell in your hand when the Slay goes off. So it's just like, situationally, it's great. But it's just like, the more I played it, I was just like, I really can't count on this to be a free spell.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it, too. I think my experience with it has been that I can usually catch somebody with the level 1 version of it, but later on in the game, it becomes harder and harder to place it in a way that you're going to take out a creature because it doesn't scale very well, and they're not going to put a creature opposing it if they can avoid it. So it's not it doesn't have a big attack to be a threat, and you're taking such a huge stat penalty that it's just very tricky to get off that free spell. And plus, you have to hope that you have a spell that is level gated to play, because again, the various levels of it is level gated, so that becomes a little bit can become a problem as the game progresses, and you don't always have the same level spells lining up with the level of the bride. So
yeah, and it's like, if you miss it in cycle 1, it's just like, do you ever play it later in the game?
I don't think so.
Yeah, it's just that's literally what I found, where it's like, you miss it in cycle 1, and now you just have likely have a dead card the rest of the game. So it's like, I think it's like one of those cards you need to have off Forge to really get the benefit. Otherwise, it's just, you're really risking, because they're never going to put a creature in front of it that's going to like die to it purposefully, unless you have somehow like buffed its stats or something like that.
Yeah, you definitely have to catch a creature with it, and you have to have a spell you want to play. So
yeah, it's just a really cool design, though. Like,
cool
from a design standpoint, I really like the card, and I like that it's a scientist and not a mage too.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so it's like, if we get Scientist Tribal that like in future sets that really like benefits more than just kind of what we've seen in Aloy in set 1, we might see Bride of Frankenbaum just get better moving forward. But yeah, it's a cool card, though.
It's a cool card, yeah. I mean, I understand why the stats are so low, but it would have probably been a little bit better if it had more attack, I think.
I agree.
And less health, I guess. So at least you're trading up a little bit, or at least on parity with other cards at that level, and hopefully you can get the spell off in the process.
Yeah.
But
Although technically mentioning set 3 with a lot of stuff where you want your own creatures to die, like this is a good situation where like maybe Bride of Frankenbaum will be good as a result of kind of that ability. Although it's really needs to be done during that turn, not necessarily at combat. So forget what I said.
okay, yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, we'll have to see how that plays out in
Yeah.
set 3 as well. But
Yeah.
yeah, Bride of Frankenbaum. Okay, it's a common, so I don't
Yeah.
expect it to be super strong. But let's move on to a rare. So let's talk about Cacklebones. So Cacklebones is a zombie dragon. It's got mobility and the slay ability. You may destroy a level 1 creature. This ability can only trigger once per turn. The way it is statted is a 1/9 at level 1. It becomes a 3/12 at level 2 with the slay ability being level gated again. And then a 5/17 at level 3. The way the stats work out on that, it only has a 2, 3, and 5 penalty, and it's heavily weighted towards its health. So I'm actually a pretty big fan of this card in the right deck. I like it a lot with Tempest, because Tempest has a lot of really good attack buff spells, and all you need is like a Spirit Golem Conclave, or Stone Skin's great with this. If you can Stone Skin, do a fight, eat something, and then eat another creature, it's fantastic. Especially because I've been in several situations where I have been able to do that, where I kill a little creature and then nuke a big creature with that fight. I do play it regularly in a deck that has the Korok ability with, I think it's called Earthen Fist. It's one of the new ones that's basically Stone Skin, but you can choose when you trigger it. So I found that to be very potent. And it is, the note about it is that it is restricted to once per turn, because otherwise the slay would just repeatedly trigger over and over again every time it's slayed. So that makes sense. It also, I found in certain situations where you'll trigger the slay early in the turn, and then you don't really have any reason to try and kill something in combat again with it, because you can only do it once, right? So but I think it's a really cool design. I like it a lot. What about you?
I like it too, and like I do appreciate the fact that it has a very low attack throughout all 3 levels. So it's like you really need to kind of go out of your way to give it a buff in order to, like you said, kind of really gain the value out of Cacklebones. Because that one attack at level 1 likely is not going to kill a lot on its own. But like I definitely remember during Gen Con, people were talking about Cacklebone Stone Skin. When I heard that for the first time, my mind was blown, and I was like, why did I never think of this? Just because of, like you said, that double kill. But the fact that it's a zombie is one of the things that really excited me the first time I saw it, because like if you have commanding or something like that could just buff it like incidentally with like having other zombies on the board. I think that's really where Cacklebones could just get that extra benefit, because they could have just made it a dragon, like just a Nekrium dragon, but the fact that it's a zombie, I think really adds a lot to this card.
Yeah, I mean, it's flavorful to the set too, right? Or to the faction, to have that zombie tagged on it.
100%.
And plus, you kind of can see through his ribcage there, so I guess that sort of implies that he's not quite alive.
And I have found, though, that a lot of people tend to ignore Cacklebones when it's on the board on its own, because it's so low attack. So it's like you basically can mobility it around, use it defensively if you need to. So it's got a lot more utility than it looks like it does right when you look at the card.
Yeah, the mobility is huge on this. I can't understate how big a deal that is. One, it really can help control where your opponent's going to play opposite, and it's a great defensive card because of how high its defense is. So even if you don't have a way of pumping attack, it can usually take a hit and survive another turn, and then you mobility it out of the way, put it in front of a minion or something. Like there's a lot of stuff you can do with this that isn't evident when you first look at it. So it's a card that looks for synergies. It wants synergies. It doesn't function very well on its own, but it has a lot of different ways you can pair cards with it to really utilize its slayability and really maximize it. So
yeah, I agree 100%.
I'm a big fan of it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, so speaking of pumping zombies, why don't you talk to us about the Cold Heart Brute?
Yeah, so we have Cold Heart Brute, which is a 3/1 with deploy. If you have an Exalt in play, you may play a mindless zombie minion. And also the second deploy ability, which says give your other zombies +1 attack. The level 2 is a 5/3 with deploy. If you have 2 or more exalts in play, you may play a zombie brute minion with deploy, give your other zombies +2 attack. And then finally, the level 3 is a 6/5 with deploy. If you have 2 more exalts, you may play up to 2 zombie brutes with deploy, give your other zombies +4 attack. So this is a card that I think I actually undervalued the first time I saw it because I didn't really understand how prevalent exalts were going to be. But with a couple of the exalts that we'll probably be talking about later, there's a lot of really cool ways to get zombies on the board. And obviously there's a lot of zombie creatures in the set. So just like, even if you don't have an exalt on the board, you get a lot of value out of the full board buff for all of your zombies just by playing the brute. But then if you can get an exalt out, being able to play minions, like especially up to 2 brutes at level 3, can really be like a game changer because you're basically going to be getting 2 brutes that are 6/6s and then get additional 4 attack on each of them.
Yeah.
So you get 2 10/6s plus a 6/5 plus any additional buffs you get. So if you have those exalts in play, it could be so much buff. And speaking of buffs, it's a -1 stat buff at level 1, a +4, and a +16 when you account for having the minions on the board as well. Yeah. So I think this is a really strong card. Like, where are your feelings on this one?
Yeah, I think it's a really strong card as well. It throws out so much just meat onto the board, right? You're filling up your lanes. You're getting relevant threats with that extra, attack bonus. It kind of reminds me of Infernal Ritual without the aggressive clause. But it asks you to do a little bit, instead of sacrificing a creature, it asks you to have some exalts in play, which is not as difficult as it sounds.
Exactly.
One thing I'll note about this that I found that's been frustrating for me, and one of the reasons I haven't really been able to play with this card very much, is that the way the algorithm works, it only looks for you to have at least 1 exalt in the deck. And every time I open this, it's always with an exalt that can't have more than 1 of it on the board. Like, I'll get a Witherfrost Circle or a Red Wasteland or something that blows up the earlier version. So in the deck itself, it can never have 2 exalts in play, which kind of is frustrating. It means I can't pair it with a non Whitefang deck I need a deck with other exalts to make it work. So there is a real cost to that, to getting those exalts in play. But if you can play it in an exalt heavy deck, I think it's great, especially with Runescarred Pit, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah. That's the exact card I was thinking of too.
Yeah, and they're both common, so it's not that hard to get those 2 at the same time. So yeah, I think it's really strong. It just throws out a lot of stats onto the board and gives you a lot of sacrifice fodder too for the Nekrium cards that care about self-destruction, and it gives those as a cost. So it's very good in like Nyx decks as well, because Nyx has a lot of those self-destruction abilities.
The only other risk that I found with this card is a lot of times during cycle 1, especially if you want to try to level this and you get it on turn 1, you might not have an exalt in play. So you are going to take a little bit of a hit to level this card for the later in the game. But if you have enough zombies, the second deploy ability is enough to make it worth it, in my opinion. But I've definitely had like weird turns where I've drawn this when I really wish I had it with an exalt or had a different hand at the time. So it's like, it's one of those cards that's like great in the right situation, but in the wrong situation, it's like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, especially with that turn 1 scenario, it puts you off curve for the rest of the game if you don't play it then and there, and that can be a big tempo hit. So you got to, play accordingly and decide how important it is to your deck.
But at least it's not a horrible underdrop, because the level 1, even just being able to buff your other zombies by 1 and potentially get a body just to clog the lanes, it's still okay. Like, it's definitely, in my opinion, a better underdrop than like something like Bride of Frankenbaum.
Yeah, for sure. Like, the fact that it creates two bodies is really big for it being an underdrop. So
or 3. But 3. I guess that's when it's...
Yeah, it's got to get... It's not... Yeah, by cycle 3, if it's still an underdrop.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. So let's talk about our next card, which is the Dissipating Spectre. So the Dissipating Spectre, not to be confused with the other Forge Modifying Spectre, is a holistic creature. So it's a 3/7 at level 1. It has a mobility 1 and stealth. So it's got about 2 point stat penalty. Not too bad for having mobility and stealth. But it reads, when this moves, give it -2 health. So in cycle 1, you're not going to be able to move this very much without incurring, it kind of killing itself in the process. But it has an interesting progression. So at level 2, it still has mobility and stealth. It's a 5/9, but it loses that minus health clause. So it can just move around freely, no big deal, -4 attack penalty. But for a stealther with mobility, that's actually not that bad. Stealth and mobility together is a very potent combination. Finally, at level 3, we have a 713 with mobility 1 and stealth. But now when you move it, it gets +2 to its health. So it goes from a penalty to a neutral to a buff for moving around. This is a pretty cool card. I haven't played with it a ton. It seems like a pretty decent sealed deck card. But yeah, I mean, being able to move around a creature with stealth gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of where you place it, if you're off forge versus on forge. Being able to, if you're on forge and you play it, your opponent's gonna be on forge the next turn, which means that you'll get the last action, which means that you can probably move it into a free lane, usually, unless they're specifically playing their creatures in a way to try and block it. So I think it has a lot of versatility to just sort of peck through damage. Mm-hmm. And it's also a really good place to put buffs. But the first level, again, it's a little weak because it has that -2 penalty, which I guess makes sense at the earlier level. It might be just a little too strong without that. And I think as a result, it kind of has a cool design. But what is your thoughts on this card?
So I feel like this was one of those cards that, like, is the lesson I always try to tell myself is read all 3 levels of a card before you say if it's good or bad. Because I remember reading the level 1, and I just assumed that when this moves, give it minus was a static ability, or it kind of went through all levels. So, like, the first time I saw the level 3 was actually during a sealed game, and my opponent got the level 3 out, and I was just like, wow, this card's actually a lot better than I give it credit for. Yeah. And the fact that it's a spirit can sometimes be relevant. I know, like, because we were doing a set 1 and set 2 mixed sealed that day, and I'm pretty sure they had like a forge seal or something where that spirit subtype did trigger off. But like, when you have something like a spirit leash that can like actually buff this as well, like, it's a nice way to kind of just push damage. And like you said, with the evasive and the stealth, with the mobility, it's just really can stick around on the board and just be kind of a pain, because it's just every other turn you could kind of sneak a way in to give it, so it's not going to be able to be blocked. It just pushed a lot. It's something I don't think I would really push in a really well-tuned competitive deck, just because you really need to buff it to really make it feel strong. But that being said, the fact that it has such a high health total, and within the way the stats have been distributed, it could really last through a couple blocks. So it's just one of those things where it's like, once you get to the level, like even at the level 1, if you don't move it, 7 is a lot to kill. Like, it's really hard to chump block. So if they put a wisp in front of it, it's just like, oh, now it's going to keep living and keep dealing damage. And I think the level 3, did you say it was like 14 or 15? Or maybe like 13.
It starts at 13 health. So.
13. And it's like, again, it's just 7, 13. It's like you can't ignore it, but it's also like you don't want to kill it. It's like you don't want to waste your resources on this, but it's just like it's going to keep pecking away.
Yeah.
So it's like, as a stealth creature, it definitely... It sticks around a lot more than you would expect. So it's a fun card for sure, and it's something that, like, I definitely feel like I want to mess around with a little more. But the times I've seen it, it definitely performed better than what I expected.
Awesome, cool. So let's move on to one that was near and dear to your heart. Let's talk about the Glorf Glob.
Glorf Glob. Yeah, this is a card that I love. So its base stats at level 1, it's a 2/2 ooze with deploy. Give this power and health equal to the health of one of your creatures, then destroy that creature. When you get to level 2, it ends up being a 5/5 with the same deploy ability, where you just give power and health equal to the health of that creature and destroy it. Now, when you get to level 3, it stays a 5/5, but when you give power and toughness equal to twice the health of your creature, then destroy that creature. So, like, you can kind of go crazy with Glorf Glob. It's something where, again, I feel like this is the theme with the Nekrium deck cards here. I kind of undervalued Glorf Glob the first time that I saw it, because I'm like, really, do I want to be eating one of my creatures to really buff? But when you have something like a Thundersaur, which is going to potentially give, like, let's say, like, we get 8 from it. Make it +8/+8 at level 1. It's like, that's pretty strong when you kind of have a nice level 1 drop. Like, you could underdrop it, destroy something, potentially trigger a death trigger, like if you have shambling on the board as well. But then just giving a nice buff off a creature that might not be doing a lot for you in that moment ends up being pretty strong. But once you get to level 3, when you could double the power and health when you do it, it's just like, I saw a deck that was actually Godjus was playing with Heart Tree, where it's like he was gaining a ton of life with like the whole Necromutera combo, giving a ton of health to his to creatures and then eating them with Glorf Glob. And I was just like, this is insane. I love Glorf Glob, and then I like the name too is just a lot of fun to say. So I
Yeah.
think this is a really fun card.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. I don't have any really good decks with it in it that I've been able to utilize. But I think on paper it's pretty strong. The one thing you
Mhm.
have to note about this is that it's not optional, and if it's your only creature, it's going to destroy itself.
Oh, I didn't even think
So,
about that.
because it doesn't say another one of your other creatures, it says one of your creatures. So be careful about that. So it does self destruct if it's the only creature. Um, and yeah, it's really good with some of the creatures that are high defense, low attack. I mean, even like Calcle Bones, right? You drop
Yeah.
Calcle Bones and then just drop this, and you have an 11/11 on turn one. That can be huge. Also, another use case for it is that if you put a creature in a lane, sort of trying to block you, and your opponent doesn't put anything in that lane, you might be able to sort of absorbs that creature's stats into this and create just a huge blocker when you're off Forge.
Hmm.
I can see a situation where you have a Dark Heart Sorcerer, but you just don't have the spells, and you really need a big creature to take something out. You just eat the Sorcerer, and now you've got a 10/10 all of a sudden. And as you were mentioning earlier, it's not a bad underdrop when you take into account the thing that it's eating is going to be just absorbed into its stats. So because we talk about stat allocations, and this one is kind of like a non-applicable in terms of like how much stats it's getting, because it really depends on what it's eating. And
Hmm.
to that effect, since that 12 point or 18 point or 27 point allocation can be either attack heavy or health heavy, you can have some really buff, healthy creatures that are otherwise lower level or low priority that this can eat easily. And you can get just such a high stat boost from it with a
Yep.
very little setup. Like just eat a stout creature that, stout creatures have, anywhere from like 8 to 10 health easily.
Yeah.
And maybe they don't have a very interesting ability, but that's one way to utilize it. Again,
I
you're
agree.
setting yourself up for a blowout of a single target removal, right? Like a Botanimate or a Dreadbolt. But you have some pretty cool things that you can do with this card. So
Oh yeah, and I also love that it's an ooze. It's very flavorful in that way.
yeah, for sure, for sure. All right, so let's see what's next after Glorf Glob. We've got the Grimgaunt Harvester. So, Grimgaunt Harvester is a 0/11 Spirit Warrior with Defender. Its ability reads when one of your creatures is destroyed, give this +2 attack. And while this has 6 attack or more, it loses Defender and has Aggressive. Uh, that ability, it goes to a 0/16 with 3 attack as the increase, and then 9 as the threshold. And then a 0/24 with 4 attack, and then 12 at the threshold. So if you're not buffing it in any other way, it takes 3 creature deaths before it'll get aggressive. It does have a high stat, a really high health stat, so it's a good Glorf Glob target.
Oh yeah.
But other than that, I have not been super impressed with this card. Or at least I haven't seen it utilized like
So
very strongly. Um,
I I will
what
say
about
there was
you?
a collection that I bought that had a Grimgaunt Harvester with a Betrayer Packmaster in the same deck, and
Mm,
that was the first time I really was like, wow, this is awesome as a warrior, because like when this is taking damage with the Packmaster on the field, or I guess even like any of the warrior buff cards, like it's just
mm,
able to giving it more attack is really helpful. But I really enjoyed those two together because it's like you don't care if this takes damage, you just throw it in front of something, let it block, gain a bunch of attack from being like the trigger of the Packmaster, which is whenever one of your warriors takes damage, it gets an additional attack. Like
mm.
that's where I found this card to shine. I do agree that it's kind of hard to really utilize right now, but I do think the fact that it's a spirit is going to be very relevant for set 3 with a lot of these new abilities that care about spirits in your banish pile. Now,
Hmm.
granted, this is kind of hard to kill, so that's going to be a whole nother thing, but I
Right.
do really like the typing on this card in order to kind of get attack buffs. Like, again, Spirit Leash is another card that could
Yeah.
really help you out, but it's definitely something that like I've really only seen it gain aggressive a couple times, like maybe
Hmm.
once or twice ever between any levels and any decks that I've seen it played in. So it's not super likely, but if you have the right deck, like with a Glorf Cloud where you're sacrificing either this or other things, like you have kind of an engine, like maybe this can kind of be a nice little payoff.
Right. I mean, I guess the reason I don't put a lot of stock in this card, like there's very, like you mentioned, there's some very niche cases where you can make it do some really crazy stuff, especially with like the Packmaster, or I guess something like a Force Field in a Loyan. I think that gives attack
Hmm.
buffs. Um, but I feel like it's asking you to do a lot of work.
That's true.
One of the problems with it I found is that it's hard tactically to put it in an open lane off Forge and not use it as a blocker initially,
Yep.
which means that you're going to be taking damage to the face because you're leaving a lane open in most cases.
Hmm.
Because what you're trying to do is throw other cards out as fodder to try and buff its attack, because that's the most natural way for it to gain attack.
Yeah.
And because it has no innate attack to begin with, if you put it into combat before anything else on your board has died, it's just going to take a hit and it's not going to survive much longer after that to gain much of an attack. So it's very tricky to use, but I can see how in certain situations with the right mix of decks, with the right warrior synergies, it can be very strong. But that's asking for a lot for just
Yeah.
one card, and unless your deck is very high rolled on the warrior synergy outside, and Nekrium doesn't have any real natural warrior synergy to begin with, so I could see if you can find like a spirit slash warrior Utera deck that it might be pretty cool, where you have like things that care about spirits and you have things that care about warriors in that in the Utera half, and then you have a few spirits in the Nekrium half. It could be because you don't want to
Hmm.
like completely weight your outbalance your deck around one card, and so that's the tricky part with it. It's kind of one of those things where the
Agree.
stars have to align for it to really be strong. um,
Yeah. I do think its best use, as you mentioned, that was Glorf Club.
yeah,
Just
just
because making a 13-13 right off the bat, if you play this into Glorf Club, is very nice.
yeah. The other place that's really strong, I guess, is with Tempest again, like we talked about with Cackle Bones, where you have some really strong attack buff modifiers,
Yeah, that's true.
that you can just throw it in, especially with something like a Spirit Golem Conclave. That almost gets it up to its full amount with just dropping it into the Conclave lane.
That is a good point.
So there are cases where that could be strong, and you can even give it aggressive while you're off Forge in those situations, and so that could be a bit of a surprise to an opponent. But again, it takes a lot of work, and I
Yeah,
like cards
that's
that
so true.
don't take a lot of work to make them good. So
I do agree. I
yeah,
agree 100%.
yeah. So moving on, let's talk about another fun scientist. You want to talk about the Keeper of the Damned?
Yeah, Keeper of the Damned is a 5/4 scientist with activate, destroy one of your creatures to play a mindless zombie in that lane. At level 2, it becomes an 8/6 with activate to destroy one of your creatures to play a zombie brute in that lane. And then finally, at level 3, it's a 12/11 with activate, destroy one of your creatures to play a zombie brute in that lane. So it's definitely a very interesting card. This card, honestly, I feel like it could be a rare, and I would be just as happy. Which actually makes me kind of happy that Keeper of the Damned is a common, for the sake of you could see it in more decks.
Mm-hmm.
But I really appreciate the fact that we have a sacrifice outlet that actually gets you a body back, and it specifically makes you a zombie body. So like when you have a Shambler out, like I've seen a lot of Keeper the Dams paired with a Shambler, sacrifice a body, get another brute, like deal 3 damage, gain 3 life. It's just like it can definitely enable a lot. And it's just one of those cards that like in general, its stats are -3, -4, and -4, so you don't really lose a lot in order to be able to get an extra body. So like you activate once and you're gonna be ahead every time. So like
Mm-hmm.
I feel like Keeper the Damned is a really awesome card, and that scientist synergy definitely could help a lot if you pair it with like a scientist heavy deck that cares about having scientists.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's one of those things where I look at it and I assume it's a zombie every time, and then like I realize it's a scientist and I'm just like, oh wow, like that makes it
Yeah, the
in
art
some
definitely
ways
makes
even
it look
better.
like a zombie.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts about Keeper?
Yeah, I like it. It doesn't. You don't take very much of a stat penalty, like you had said. You give it's a good minion synergy card and a good zombie synergy card, so it has two roles there. And I found one of the interesting use cases with it is that if you can play that minion into a favorable catch where that minion's going to survive, you can effectively just keep resetting the health on that minion. You just destroy the minion and make it whole again, essentially.
Yeah.
So it basically becomes like a regenerating minion if you can, and you're basically getting card advantage or action advantage that way. Another really cool use case with it is Glowhive Nursery.
Ooh,
Because especially
yeah.
if you're pumping its attack and health, and you keep resetting it, it's gonna get the glow hive nursery buff every time. So that's a combo I want to try. Joel or Terratot Eat a Lot. He showed me that really early in the format, and I've always wanted to make a deck like that. I just haven't really found the right combination yet. But it's like it's very oppressive because they just keep coming back, and
Yeah,
they're
that's
big.
insane.
A
Yeah.
12/12 brute, in the level 3 Glow Hive lane is crazy.
Yeah.
And one thing I do want to note with this card has to do with the Aloyan salvage and operator cards. So salvage and operators basically say that when the creature is destroyed, you put a gizmo in that lane. They're kind of a non-bow with this card because the way it works is that you resolve the full ability of the Keeper of the Damned before you resolve that salvage or operator ability. And it's not a May, so what's going to happen is you're going to destroy your zombie, or you're going to destroy the salvage creature, and you're just going to get a gizmo because the gizmo is going to replace whatever zombie you make.
Hmm.
So just
That
be
makes
aware of
sense.
that. It could be cool with a Possumancer,
Yeah, that's a good
but
point.
um, it's just a weird thing just with the way the batching works and how the ability resolves. So just be kind of cognizant of that if that situation comes up.
Yeah, and honestly, I feel like I'm surprised I don't see more people playing this with a Mad Lab combo as well. Because like if you have a Nexus Core Prime out, you destroy the creature that's in that lane, which lets you make another minion in a different lane that's empty.
Mm-hmm.
You basically could just every turn destroy the creature that's in your Nexus Core Prime, make a gizmo in a different lane and replace it with a brute or a zombie. And like it's always going to be there. So it's just like it keeps filling. And granted, it's like maybe there are other cards and other factions that could be stronger with that combo, but I feel like that's like a nice little way to fuel a Nexus Core Prime. Just like, all right, like
Yep.
every turn, it's something's gonna get destroyed here, and it's gonna just be filled right back.
Yeah. Now
Um,
you're making me need to make that deck now.
yeah, that's one I don't have a laboratory with a Mad Lab kind of
Yeah.
combo, so
Yeah.
that's what I'm jealous of. I need to pick one up.
Yeah, they're really fun. For sure, for sure. Okay. So yeah, Keeper of the Damned. It's like it. It's nice that's a common. Hopefully it'll show up again in the next set, especially given that we know that destruction is going to be a major theme for Nekrium and
Yeah.
Tepes in that set. So let's move on to the Plague Spewer. So the Plague Spewer is a 3/6 beast at level 1 that reads deploy, choose a faction, give all other creatures of that faction -1/-1. At level 2 it becomes a 4/9 and the penalty becomes -2/-2, and then at level 3 you get a 7/12 with -3/-3 to all creatures of the chosen faction besides itself. What you're taking in terms of stat penalty, it's like a -3, -5, -8, and most of that is weighted towards its attack, so it's got a pretty decent health stat. And I kind of like this card. It doesn't seem like a lot, but you'll find more often than not that you can really control who it hurts more, right? Unless you're
Oh, yeah.
playing against pure Nekrium, like against a Nekrium only opponent, or if you're playing against a Nekrium opponent, it's gonna be a little trickier, especially if you're playing your own Nekrium stuff, or if you're basically playing a mirror match with the same two factions, that becomes tricky. But the fact that you get to control it is pretty strong, and it's a minor buff, a minor debuff, but it's also one that is really good at cleaning up creatures from previous combats.
Yeah.
And the fact that it doesn't hurt itself is really just nice. Like it doesn't, naming Nekrium is not a problem for it.
Yeah.
Personally, I like this one better than the Spirit Reaver from set 1, where it only gave like a negative to the health, even though it was repeatable. That one, it felt like its stats were just a little too low compared to what Plague Spewer has.
Mhm.
And I usually felt like you only kind of got that ability off once anyway. So
Yeah,
I think I
usually.
like this as a replacement to the Spirit Reaver. But what's your thought on Plague Spewer?
No, I definitely agree. The fact that it hits attack too is very relevant. So in a couple of my decks, Spirit Reaver just happens to be in them, and I definitely have found that it's a very hard card to play because it's like a lot of times you're going to hit something of yours in order to really like damage your opponent. So I feel like Plague Spewer is definitely going to have a little bit of that issue as well because it's like, and like you said, like there's a good chance there's going to be at least one overlap faction in like the two decks that you're playing between you and your opponent. But like this could do a really good job at cleaning up stuff like wisps, gizmos, things like that. Like as soon as you get to level 2, it could just really like do a lot of damage. And then the fact that it hits attack 2 could be enough to just like have a breakpoint where your creature survives combat. So it's like
Yeah.
it's definitely a stronger card for sure. Like once we get to the Plague Spewer version of it. But the fact that it's a beast is also interesting to me because
Yeah.
there are definitely ways to buff your beasts. Specifically, Patron is a really good option.
Right.
So it's like if you throw out a Plague Spewer, it's got a little bit of a lower attack, higher health. You play a Patron, and now you feel like you're pretty well statted. But that obviously requires a second card.
Right. You have to
But
match those two up. Another
yeah,
thing too that you can try with this is if you are facing kind of a mirror in the factions in your match, you can try and prioritize putting different factions across from each other. So like if their opponent has like a Utera creature across from you, you put your Nekrium creature across from it, so that if you do have to debuff something, it's only affecting one side of the board instead of both, and you're not really netting anything. Like if you have two Utera creatures across from each other, giving them -1/-1 each is not going to change the combat math. But
that's true.
but this is something that's a little bit finicky. Otherwise, I think the stats are fine, and it can dish out a lot of negatives to the board that can have a decent amount of impact on it. So,
No, for
I dig
sure.
it. So that's
I
the
agree.
last of our holistic creatures. So why don't we talk about the forge creatures? And we'll start off with the Alluvian. Do you want to talk about the Alluvian?
Yeah, sure. So we have a Combat Illuvian here, which is a 4/4. It's an ooze beast with deploy. If your Forgeborn is a higher level than this creature, give an enemy creature -3/-3. When you get to level 2, Combat Illuvian is a 6/6 with deploy. Same thing if your Forgeborn is a higher level, you give an enemy creature -5/-5. And then when you get to level 3, it's a 9/10 with the same deploy ability, except you give an enemy creature -7/-7. So out of all these, like, because each faction has a different deploy creature that has the ability, if your Forgeborn is a higher level, which really kind of pushes you to underdrop this card. I feel like this is one of my favorites because it's like kind of removal on a stick. So it's like, hey, I'm not going to play this Combat Illuvian during cycle 1, so cycle 2, I could basically get a 4/4 and I could potentially kill something. I basically get a nom 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 for free where I'm guaranteed to
Right.
have the body.
Right.
So Illuvian itself, though, it gets a -4, a -6, and a -8 buff. So it's definitely like you lose a lot of stats to have this ability. But like this is a card that if you draw it, you could be like, hey, I'll save it for later, and I don't feel bad. And the fact that it's a news beast is pretty cool.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you need to get the right modifier with it. There are some real feel bads modifiers that you can get with this.
Hmm.
For example, I have an Abyssal Alluvian, which is really tiny stats, and you kind of want to play it in cycle 1 at the end if you can, right? If you happen to draw it in turn 3, and it's like, well, now
Yeah,
it's off curve. I don't know, but of all the ones of these underdrop creatures, I think I like this one. I still think I like the Hawk Rider the best, but I think this is a great second place for me.
yeah, that's a good point.
The total stats that you're getting is above curve for it. Substantially above curve, enough above curve where that you get. So basically, you're getting a 7/7 here, right, with the combat level 1. So it's started edging towards a level 2's worth of stats almost. Um, then you're only like 4 stat points low. Here you're what? You get 22, so you get 11 plus 11, so it's like 22, so it's a little bit above a level 2. But at stage 3, so it's a little bit below 27. Yeah, so like you're only like half a level below what you would be if you're playing it as an underdrop, which is fine because you can't level every card every cycle. And the
Yeah,
fact that you can take out a whole creature with it is a pretty big deal because taking out a 10/5 is a big deal, right? And
I
having a
agree.
body left over is nice. And the nice thing too is that it's in Nekrium that has a lot of creature destruction synergies, so getting that body is relevant more times than not. So being able to take out something, have the body, sack it to something else is pretty cool. It's just you have to have the right modifier on it. It needs to have stats so that it can either brawl or it has to have like a crazy ability that you want to play off cycle.
Mm.
Because things like Ghoulish, it's like, well, I don't want Ghoulish in level 1. I don't want to play Ghoulish at level 2 with the level 1 version of it, right? Because I don't want to
Yeah,
be upgrading a level 1 card in level cycle 2. So you have some of these combinations it can get that are really awkward,
Yeah,
but otherwise, I think it's fine. It has its role to play, and it's part of that cycle. It's situational, but it's nice to
yeah,
have those situational cards in your deck sometimes.
I agree. And I'm pretty sure one of my decks has like a Devouring Illuvian, so it's like basically being able to whenever you play a spell,
Hmm.
give minus minus in addition to having that deploy ability has like was pretty fun. I think that might be the only Illuvian that I've actually played itself. So it's like that was a fun modifier on this card. I don't know
Yeah,
how much of a stat debuff it was, but it was still just a very fun version.
yeah. I mean, if you have like the extra utility ability, that makes sense for sure. Because especially since you can spread around that minus attack, minus health with the devouring aspect of it.
Yeah,
So again, this is one of those ones that's very dependent on your forge modifier for it to feel
I
good.
agree. 100%.
Otherwise, I'd rather just have like a walker that has a slightly lower stat penalty, but is guaranteed to be able to do it
Yeah,
every cycle.
that's a good point.
So let's see what is next. We've got the butcher. So butcher is a at level one. The combat butcher is a 6/5, so you're only losing one health compared to your regular creature. But with that, you get slay, deal one damage to the enemy player, you gain one health. At level two, you get a -2 stat penalty, but you get slay, deal two damage to the enemy player, you gain two health. And then at level three, you have a -3 stat penalty, and you do slay, deal three, gain three. So it's kind of like a reverse shambler where you're killing their creature and
Mhm.
it's giving you attack or it's giving you health and hurting them a little bit. It also kind of it's kind of similar, I guess, in a way to the elk from Utera, where you just with the elk you just gain life and it's a little bit higher. I think it's kind of on par with that in terms of the amount of sort of life swing that you get.
Mhm.
I like this guy. I mean, you don't take very much of a stat penalty, and you get that sort of bleed damage to go along with it. So, with the right modifier, especially one that's like an ardent or a hibernating, where it gets really big, especially when it's got the highest amount of drain on it, is really nice. Because you don't. I mean, drain one is not that big of a deal, but drain two and drain three can really add up
Oh yeah,
over a couple
I
turns.
agree.
So if you can
Yeah,
find this with a decent health stat, I think it's pretty good.
I agree.
But
Yeah, and I feel like Butcher, I feel like it has the stat distribution that I wish that Bride of Frankenbaum had, because it's got just enough attack where I feel like it gets better breakpoints during combat, because it's like a
mhm,
6/5 instead of I think it was like a 4/4, and
right.
then once you get up, it's just like it kind of prioritizes a little bit more on the attack. So it's like one of those cards that you could drop even as an underdrop and kind of get into combat and get a slay
Mhm.
just to get a kill, and it's something where it's got enough of an attack where they have to deal with it. So it's like if I see a 9/7 drop on the board, it's just like, oh man, like I don't really want to take nine, but I also don't want to drop a wisp in front of it because I'm just going to take an additional two anyway. So
Yeah.
it's like it does put a little bit of pressure for them to have removal for it, and if they're removing this instead of your other threats, it's definitely useful.
Hmm.
And again, I think the typing here is another like beneficial to have beast and warrior because there are ways to buff them. So it's like I definitely appreciate the typing on the butcher,
Yeah.
and it's definitely something where it's like I've played it before, mostly in sealed. But when I do tend to play it, I'm like, oh, this card's not bad. Like it's something where I'm usually happy to see it enough where I'll play it, and I won't be like, this is a dead card in my deck. But it's also not something I necessarily will say like this is the card that I'm prioritizing to play.
Yeah. I think this is a role player. It's a good pawn, but it isn't like a build around card per se.
Yeah,
But it's a good stat stick, and it gives you that extra little bleed, and sometimes you get those life gain triggers that are relevant. So
yeah. And again, if you have a really good modifier for this, it could just be a really like fun card.
yeah, and this is one of those ones where I'm like okay with the modifier just being centered around stats.
Yeah,
Combat,
that's true.
ardent, hibernating. Like it doesn't need, it doesn't even really want to have other modifiers that penalize its stats because its slayability is the strongest aspect of it.
Yeah, although
Um,
I do actually really like Abyssal Butcher. I feel like this is one of those cards I'm happy
that's
to
a
be
cool
Abyssal
one. Okay, that one
because
I'll
it's
give
like
you.
because at the end of the cycle it's just like all right, like we're good.
Yeah, or
Um,
devouring butcher is probably pretty cool too.
yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. Or even Doom would be cool, but we're gonna talk about that soon.
Yeah, we'll talk about Doom in the next section. That's a fun one for sure.
Yeah,
But why don't we talk about before we get there? Speaking of devouring, let's talk about the devourer. How do you like that segue?
yeah, that was a good one. I like that one a lot. So Combat Devourer, it's a 6/4 ooze beast with deploy. You may destroy one of your exalts to destroy a creature at the same level. At level 2, it's a 9/7 with the same ability. And then at level 3, it's a 13/12 with the same ability. So basically, your ability is kind of level gated to the exalts that you have on your board. So it's one of those cards that's a perfect underdrop. Because it's like, at the end of the day, when you're playing this, you're likely going to be playing this card to get your deploy ability versus actually getting the body on the board. So it's like, no matter what, it's just like, hey, I put the body out, or it's like kind of like a 1-for-1. As soon as you destroy one of your exalts that's kind of sitting around that might not be doing a ton, like, granted, I don't want to be destroying my like low hive nursery, but like there are some like where it's like if the level 1 is going to get destroyed when you play the level 2 anyway, I feel like those are the perfect cards to kind of destroy with a combat devourer or any other devourer. But it's nice to have a way to get rid of my exalts and use them for something if I need to. It's definitely was a really cool card design. It's one that I've never actually utilized myself because I usually want my exalts to stay when they're there.
Yeah.
But I could see it being beneficial in the right situation.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on the underdrop aspect of it for sure, and it's very good to pair it with those exalts that self-destruct, like when you play the higher levels, especially because you can actually stack the deploy in a way that you can get the benefit from that exalt on it before you sacrifice the exalt. So you could throw this on a Spirit Golem Conclave and then throw the Spirit Golem Conclave at something. So you get that extra attack buff, and then you throw it at something to take it out. Again, the fact that it's not level gated other than the level of your exalt is nice. But it can also be frustrating because it's harder, like the higher the level your exalt is, the more impact it's going to have on the board, which means it's a bigger sacrifice to make. So it's kind of one of those things. It's a nice utility, and you're only taking like a -2 stat penalty on the health from this guy compared to other like the standard baseline. So getting that extra utility and having that available, it makes it a very nice to have card in your deck, kind of like a Tinker is a nice to have card in your deck, where it won't always be relevant, but when it's relevant, it is very relevant. So I definitely like having this if I can.
It's a good point, and it's kind of like a mirror to Cutthroat because of that, because it's like Cutthroat's obviously destroy a creature to destroy another creature of the same level, and then this one's just destroy an exalt instead. So it's interesting. I kind of wish that they made it in a modifier instead of just like the creature itself, just so it kind of mirrors Cutthroat even more. But again, like it's one of those cards where sometimes I'll see Devour in my deck and I'm just like, oh man, like, but it's good in certain situations, but it forces you to play this with either an Exalt heavy Nekrium deck like we were talking about with Brute, or we would have to, or Cold Heart Brute, I mean, and then otherwise you have to play it with the set 2 deck or potentially set 3 moving forward, where it's like you have to have an Exalt heavy list to really feel comfortable.
Yeah. I mean, if you have a really heavy Exalt or Exalt heavy list, you're probably going to get to the point where you're just having too many exalts on the board.
That's true.
You just need to make room from the lower level ones. And so, yeah, I mean, it's situational, but I think it's fine. I'm not going to seek it out specifically, but I'm not disappointed when it's in my deck. Unlike some other cards, I might just like, there are definitely cards where you're just like, man, why did this have to roll in this deck? But this one, I'm like, okay, sure. If I have an exalt or two, it's not a bad one to grab. So.
And I will say the stat debuff, which is -2 across the board, it's definitely not a lot of loss in order to get that ability. So it's one of those things where it's like, I'm okay with the body of the creature to be able to have that ability on the creature.
Yeah.
And I think, like you said, the modifier here could make a big difference.
Yeah, it's an opportunity cost, basically.
So, yeah, for sure.
So that's the Devourer. Why don't we talk about the Poltergeist? Do you want to talk about this one?
Sure. Yeah, so Poltergeist, it's a 3/4 it's a spirit, and then it has deploy. If one of your creatures was destroyed this turn, deal 3 damage to a creature or player, and you gain 3 life. At level 2, Combat Poltergeist is a 5/7. It has deploy. Same thing. If one of your creatures was destroyed this turn, deal 5 damage to a creature or player, and you gain 5. And then finally, Poltergeist is an 8/12 with the deploy. If one of your creatures was destroyed this turn, deal 7 damage to a creature or player, you gain 7. So this was a card that when I first read it, I didn't realize it said creature or player. And the first time someone actually used it to hit player, because I always just saw creature, I was just like, wow, okay, this is a lot stronger than I thought it was. And with all of the self-destruction that's kind of in the set that we've already seen, there's a lot of opportunity to trigger Combat Poltergeist, or any Poltergeist. Specifically, like Keeper of the Damned with Poltergeist is really fun because it's like destroy a creature, replace it, and then also following play, you play a Poltergeist, deploy, like basically use it as removal, use it as damage to the face, gain life, and it's basically just like a mini shamble almost. Like
Hmm.
it's really good. Like this is a card that I think, especially if you have a good modifier on it, it just puts it over the top. But it's a card I haven't played enough of, and it's a card that every time I see it played, I'm just like, wow, like that exceeded my expectations.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I don't. It's a rare creature, so it's not one that I have very many of. So I haven't had a chance to play with them a lot. But I have seen some really nutty ones. Hematophagic and
Oh,
Doom are really good modifiers for this because they force you to they allow you to destroy one of your own creatures, and you can stack to deploy so that one takes place first, and then it automatically meets the poltergeist clause. So if you can find one of those are very strong. They treat you can treat them kind of like a spell where you're sacking a creature to do a bunch of nutty stuff. We'll talk about Doom in the next section, but essentially it lets you destroy a creature to deal damage. So you use Doom, destroy a creature to deal damage, and then just get this extra attack and or extra
yeah,
drain tacked onto it. So you can dish out a ton of damage with one of these
yeah.
with the right
Vampiric's
modifier.
also great too because it's just
Which one?
enter Vampiric.
Vampiric, yeah, yeah,
It's just more redundant damage and life gain.
yeah, yeah. So this is one of those ones where I'm okay if it has very low stats because I'd like to. You're really getting a bonus from the deployability more than anything, and you're treating it a little bit more like a spell than a creature. It's kind of like a spell that leaves behind a body to use as fodder for something else later.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
yeah, it's a very cool ability. Given that's a spirit and it has the destruction synergy, I'm hoping this will come back in set 3 since both those are themes for that set. So
Yeah, I hope so too.
yeah. All right, so we've got, I believe, one more of the Forge creatures, and that is going to be the Revenant. So the Revenant is a zombie. It's a 5/4. When you have combat, it's a 5/4, so you got a -3 stat penalty. And it reads, when this is destroyed, you may deal 2 damage to a creature. At level 2, you have a 7/6, which is effectively a 5 stat penalty, and it does 4 damage to a creature on destruction. And then you have a 10/10, so it's like a 7-point stat penalty, and you do 6 damage to a creature on destruction. It's a common. It's okay. Um, I'm never like happy to see this card in my deck unless it happens to have like a high attack modifier usually.
Hmm.
Because essentially what you're trying to do with this is trade it and then try and pick off something that was going to survive combat. Otherwise, the amount of damage it's doing is so small that it often goes to waste.
Hmm.
Um, because imagine a combat where you knock out you trade across the board with they're 5/5 and they have a mindless zombie as their only other creature. Well, you do 2 to the mindless, and it's like it didn't
Yeah.
really do anything. Whereas you could have had like a 5/6 and it survived the combat, and so it's kind of like it's a very situational card. It's not one I prioritize.
Hmm.
It's kind of lackluster to me, but what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I feel like it's almost a card you have to use defensively more than offensively, because
Yeah.
it's just like you drop it like again off Forge, and you kind of determine, hey, I could at least favorably block somewhere else and also damage another creature. But like other than that, it's like it's okay. Like it's pretty strong when you have other payoffs for sacrificing your own creatures. So it's
Hmm.
like if you're gonna have something like a Keeper of the Damned, sacrifice it, deal damage to a creature, and get a body. Like I'm okay with that. It's something where it's like I'm not necessarily seeking it out, but at the
Hmm.
same time, it's like I feel like there's only one time where I feel like it's really gotten a lot of value against me. When someone played a Revenant, blocked, killed something else, and I was just like, oh wow, that was like pretty nice 2 for 1. Um,
Right.
I do think I like it better than Fiend though. I'm not sure because it's like I kind of like Fiend at a lot of times. Like if you have no other creatures on the board, like we were talking about, I think last time we
Hmm.
were having a discussion, like basically when Fiend dies, you give a creature an attack and health buff. So here, when this dies, you basically get to deal damage to a creature instead. So it's
Hmm.
like I feel like you're more likely to be able to say, hey, this is gonna die. I'm gonna deal damage to an enemy creature. Like they could kind of control a little better on Fiend, kind of keeping your board
Right.
clear. Where I feel like Revenant, it's a little more of a headache for them, but like it's still not a perfect situation.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those cards that's good at cleaning up the board,
Yeah,
but that relies on sort of the right board state for it to be good,
yeah.
versus just being kind of good on its own. So, you know,
And like the the level 3 dealing 6 damage isn't bad, but like I don't know if I'm ever getting this card to level 3 in a game where it's going to be
Yeah.
relevant.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it scales very well. Like 246
Yeah.
is not a very good scaling to me based on like how the game progresses. Like if it did like 258 or something like that, I'd be more impressed with it, I think.
Yeah.
Um but it's just the scaling isn't quite there for me, but
Even if it did like 3 at level 1 to be able to destroy a mindless zombie,
yeah.
um, that would have been cool. But I understand why they went for 2,
Yeah, I
just because.
understand. I understand how they balance the math on it. It just, like I said, it's not
Yeah.
a particularly impressive card, but it's a common, so you can't expect too much out of it.
Yeah.
But that is the last of our Forge creatures, so why don't we go into the Forge modifiers, and let's start off with the Bloodletting. So if you have this is the first time you're watching one of these videos, I use the Tactician as our baseline, so it's weird to see a Betrayer, but we're talking about the Bloodletting for the Forge modifier here.
Awesome. Do you want me to take this one?
Yeah, why don't you take this one? Yeah.
Perfect. So Bloodletting is activate to deal 2 damage to you, and you gain, or this gains 2 attack. So that ability is kind of the main ability of Bloodletting. So at level 2, Bloodletting Tactician activate to deal 2 damage to you, and you gain 3 attack. And then finally, Bloodletting Tactician has activate deal 2 damage to you and you get 4 attack on this creature. So it kind of reminds me a little bit of Furious, where it's like kind of dealing damage to, instead of the creature, to you to get the attack buff. So that was the first thing I saw when I saw Bloodletting, and just from the name, it's very flavorful because it's just like, hey, like I'm bloodletting kind of myself in order to like siphon myself in order to kind of make the buff on my creature. So it gives a -2, -2, and -4 stat modifier to the creature. But that being said, like there are a couple creatures that care about dealing damage to a player, like drone. Like I really want to get a bloodletting drone.
Yeah.
But that's just me with my whole corrupt drone for worlds. But like anything where it's like, hey, I could buff a creature, deal attack to myself, feels very Necrum because it's like I'm willing to sacrifice my life in order to get my creature stronger. So this is definitely a cool one, and I feel like drone is probably the best card for this modifier, but it's a betrayer, obviously.
Yeah, a rare Betrayer at that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think this is a card that, like, if anyone has a bloodletting drone, not to turn this into an ask trade thing, but I'm looking for one.
Yeah, I think I am as well. So we'll have to see.
That's true.
Don't forget what channel you're watching this on.
That's true. That's a good point.
Fair.
But what are your thoughts on bloodletting?
So yeah, for bloodletting, I have not been able to use this to good effect yet on the creatures that I've played it with. One thing that kind of bothers me is that you don't really get a stat benefit until you've hit yourself twice with it. You have to, you're just even after the first activation. You're a little ahead on level 2, just for whatever reason, the way they did the stats. You'd have like a 1-point benefit. But, you'd have a 14-13, which is right on curve for taking 2 damage. So you're already taking damage to try and get it just on par, which means you have to activate it at least twice. And then you're kind of getting into the Corrupt range, and I think Corrupt had a pretty decent bonus right off the bat in terms of survivability. So the fact that it's optional is nice. You're not priced into it like you are with the Corrupt modifier. So you don't have to activate it if it's already going to trade with a creature, right? If you're going to kill something with 5 toughness, for example, you don't have to activate it. I have it on a Shambler, which is cool because you at least gain some of that life back. But it's a little fiddly, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree.
It takes too. You have to spend. You get too much of a stat penalty off the beginning, and the fact that you need to do it at least twice, which means you need to survive a round of combat before you get a bonus to the attack. So I guess maybe like on a stealth creature where it's hard for them to block it, where you can have a couple turns of activation, or something that has a high toughness to begin with, and then you can activate it a couple times. Maybe on a Moeba where it gets really big in the second level and it's harder to kill. Something like that could be good. But so far it hasn't wowed me as an ability.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like it's almost like it needs to be in a deck where it's either got a betrayer where it cares about dealing damage to yourself, or like maybe like Thunder Crash Field is not bad.
That's true.
It's just like a way to continuously like take 2 damage to yourself and to your opponent. But it's like I would probably rather play other things than bloodletting.
Yeah, I can definitely see it being good with cards that care about increased attack. right? So,
Yeah, for sure. Or like even stealth too is not bad.
yeah.
Because it's like I'm okay to take 2 damage to deal an extra 4, but then that means you're getting your card to level 3. But
Right.
the reason why, like, I initially used to be like a bloodletting, but then I thought like, oh, bloodletting drone is such a good card. Now I have like a little bit of a soft spot for it. But like thinking about the stat debuff and the fact that it's like I would just rather have almost like a combat instead of bloodletting. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, it's a common modifier. It has some interesting applications, but why don't we talk about Doom? So, did I talk about Doom? Is my turn? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it's your turn.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Because I like Doom. Doom is awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So Doom, you get a -3 stat penalty at the first level, and what it reads is: deploy. You may destroy another one of your creatures to deal 5 damage to a creature or player. Okay. I mean, you sack a creature, you could probably kill something or do some face damage. At level 2, it's, I believe, a 4-point stat penalty. Yeah. And you get to do 7 damage for destruction. But when it hits level 3, that's when it gets really interesting. So at level 3, it has deploy. You may destroy another one of your creatures to deal damage equal to its attack to a creature or player. And you have an 8-point stat penalty on it. So, the stat penalty ramps up, but the damage output can really get nuts.
Oh, yeah.
I think Doom is really cool. I kind of actually like it a bit better than Cutthroat from the previous set, in that you can actually damage face if you need to, and you're not like level gated with it. So you can take out or finish off some creatures with. It's got a decent amount of damage. Like, it can usually take out a creature on level. Otherwise, just hitting face, especially in a very aggressive deck, you can throw something that isn't going to get through anyway. To face if you need to, or if it's not a favorable trade. And if you can really like jack up a creature like a Thundersaur or a Glorfglob or a Krogius, and just throw Krogius straight to the face before combat even happens. Like, there's some really, the level 3 has a very big promise to it. I mean, I haven't pulled it off yet, but it seems like you can get some really good mileage out of the 3rd level. But have you played with this much?
I've used Doom, and I've really, like you kind of mentioned, I haven't seen the level 3 very often, but I think I might have seen it like once or twice, but it wasn't with like anything crazy. Like, I know like the dream is to like Doom a Krogius or like an Arboris or something like that. But I have seen Doom used to flip a Rumblespark before. So it's kind of got that vampiric thing where it's like, hey, I'm going to destroy one of my creatures, immediately flip my Rumblespark so I could kind of get my level 3 embodiment, and it's like definitely really strong in that aspect. But I really enjoy Doom because, like you mentioned, the stat penalty is, I think, worth the amount of damage you're dealing. But I love seeing Doom and Glorfglob in the same deck. Like, that's kind of the dream, because getting that double buff and then being able to then sacrifice it to then deal damage equal to its power is pretty incredible. I feel like that's something I need to brew. Like, I've thought about it a bunch and I've never actually done it.
Yeah, it's kind of a little bit like Magical Christmas Land. It's kind of like Charge Plated Specimen, where like you just have to, like, everything has to align just right, but it feels so good when it happens.
I will happily play the deck like 30 times in order to have it happen once.
Yeah, exactly. Just to pull that off.
That one time will be glorious.
Yeah, but yeah, I like it. It's a pretty cool ability. I have a deck with a Doom Stitcher that I really want to get to work, because I think that could be a lot of fun, where you're reanimating something and then immediately throwing it at them.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So, but yeah, hopefully I'll be able to brew something cool with that. So Doom, this is the other, ability we're talking about with the Poltergeist, where it self-synergizes. So, it has there are a lot of creatures that you can pair this with, that it'll self-synergize and just be strong.
Yeah, like Doom Drone.
Doom Drone, yeah, there you go. It's that creature free upgrade, free play.
Yeah, I will say there are quite a few modifiers in set 2 Nekrium which specifically make me want to get Betrayer drones. So it's like, this is another one of them.
Yeah,
like it's so good.
Yeah, for sure.
Not to keep bringing up the drone, but that's near and dear to my heart.
Oh, I know. It's legendary now, for sure.
That's true. Good point.
It is platinum. It's a platinum drone.
And I guess for anyone who doesn't know what drone is, it's basically whenever it deals damage to a player. It's a creature. When it deals damage to a player, you get to upgrade a card and discard it from your hand. And then at level 3, you could upgrade a card and play it for free. So basically, if a drone has a modifier that deals damage to yourself on enter or on activation, you basically could just upgrade cards without having to deal damage with combat. So that's where these like modifier with drone is really powerful. So like Doom Drone, Bloodletting Drone, both deal damage directly to the player. So it's like it's just really good. It's a lot of fun.
But at the same time, drone is is native to Aloyan, so you have to get that betrayer. So it's super rare.
Magical Christmas land.
Magical Christmas land. But hey, if whatever comes around, we know who to call.
Yeah, true.
So let's move on to Horrific. Do you want to talk about Horrific?
Yeah. So Horrific is basically deploy, give the opposing creature -2 attack and -2 health. At level 2, it's deploy, give the opposing creature -3 attack and -3 health. And then at level 3, it's deploy, give the opposing creature -5 attack and -5 health. So at Horrific, it gives a -3, -4, and -7 stat penalty. So technically, you end up ahead every time you play it, because if you're going to actually give an opposing creature minus. But the problem is you have to be playing it across of a creature that you want to give a debuff to. Mm-hmm. So, like, let's say they have, like, just like a Uranti Elementalist level 3 on the board that's got 5 health left, but you have a creature in front of it that you want to keep. It's like you have to replace that creature to really get the benefit. So it's like that's one of those downsides here, but at the same time, like, it feels really good to just drop it in front of a creature that you know it's going to kill. It's just like so much value in that aspect, because it's like you end up getting, it's very close to an Omnom-Nom, right? Because it starts at -3, -3.
It starts at 2/2.
Oh, that's what it is. Yeah. And so it's 2/2, 3/3, 5/5. So it's like it definitely, like, it's gonna hit certain creatures. It's gonna give like that nice little combat math early on, where it's like this might not have traded, but it will trade after you actually drop it. It's like it's a fun ability, and like I said, with the stat debuff that you get, I think it's definitely worth what you get out of it from the deploy. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of a slightly better version of, was it Toxic from Utera?
Oh yeah, where exactly.
You play it across from a creature, they lose health, but then that creature gains health. So like this is, I think, a little bit better, because even if you don't kill the creature, you're giving it a permanent attack debuff. So you know, this can survive. Like this will either, if it doesn't kill the creature, at least it makes it the creature, the horrific creature, more survivable. And if it doesn't survive, then the next round of combat, that creature still has a reduced attack, right? So usually you want to play this if you can finish something off, or at least make the combat favorable. But you know, there, like you said, it's situational in that, like, you don't want to play it across from a creature that you have to do a replacement with. So that's where it becomes a little bit weaker. But I feel like, you know, in most cases you can at least put it across from some creature and get something to be debuffed, even if it isn't the one you want to take out. A really cool one is a Horrific Walker, because you can do a lot of stat debuff and you can spread it around. So that's a pretty cool one to have the modifier. And there are a couple other creatures, I'm sure, that with like, you know, a Horrific Butcher, you know, immediately kill something, get the slay bonus. That's pretty cool. But yeah, it's okay. I mean, it's a common modifier. I don't expect a ton out of it. But it does just enough of that sort of combat, you know, messing with combat TM that we all know and love, where you can really kind of change the way the next turn the combat's going to play out, especially if you're off Forge. You can really surprise some people that way.
No, it's a really good point. Yeah, and I definitely like this one with Butcher specifically, because we're talking about, hey, this would be what would be good modifiers for Butcher? Like, definitely Horrific.
Yeah, this and Banshee as well. It's good on Banshee too.
Oh yeah, that's a great point.
So let's talk about Howling. So Howling is reads at the start of the turn, deal 2 damage to the enemy player, you gain 2 health. At level 2, it's deal 3, gain 3, and at level 4, or at level 3, it is deal 5, gain 5. The nice thing about this is you don't really take much of a stat penalty. You're only taking like 1, 1, and 3 total to the stat penalty, and it's mostly on the attack. You know, if you can get this to survive, it's pretty much it's basically vampiric that keeps on going, and I think it's actually a little bit better in terms of the stats you get compared to vampiric, but I have to double check on that. But yeah, I like it. It's the trick is that it has to survive combat to get the bonus, and it's very hard to trigger it multiple times. But it does sort of like force your opponent to deal with it, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, you're kind of forcing your opponent's hand and saying, like you're off forward, you play it, in an open lane so it can't take damage or be removed, and then the next turn you're telling your opponent, hey, you need to deal with this, right? And you're kind of forcing them to take care of it. And if you have ways of buffing it and sort of like making trades like awkward for your opponent, that could be especially strong.
Oh yeah.
So I think it's nice. It's actually scales better than Shambling does by itself. It's not as explosive as Shambling, but if you can keep something like this around long enough, you can do quite a bit of damage.
What I will say though with Howling, it's ability I haven't like played against a lot, but I've seen a lot of Howling Shamblers, and those are the ones that seem to be really nice because it's like, hey, you get the buff on combat, then if it lives like you said, you get the drain on combat, and then you get the additional drain at the start of the turn. This is also a card when I read the start of the turn, I assumed it was the start of your turn kind of thing, like when you on the forge or whatever. I don't know why I thought this. So I didn't realize it's like right after combat it immediately triggers, and then every
Yes.
turn after combat it immediately triggers.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where I just assumed like when you're the Forge player, this goes or whatever, and like I don't know why it was like that in my brain, but I very much undervalued Howling until I saw it played the first time, and I was just like, oh, this is every turn. Like this is actually solid. Like as you said, if it could stick around. So I definitely really like the ability and the fact that you don't get a lot of a stat debuff. It's really nice to be able to kind of just gain health. Like that's what Nekrium does best. It's
Mm-hmm.
just gain health and continually drain your opponent. So I like it a lot.
Yeah, and the fact that it's more weighted towards health over attack is nice too. Like the penalty you're getting is to the attack, not to its defense, so it has that survivability. So
Yeah,
but yeah,
no, I
Howling
agree.
Shambler for sure. Definitely can verify is cool.
Howling Stitcher too.
Howling
Although
Stitcher. Oh, that could be interesting.
Stitcher doesn't last a lot, but with the value you get from Stitcher, if it can last through combat, it's just nice to keep that.
Yeah, yeah, and then your opponent has to deal with this 1/1 or whatever.
Yeah, which it's like, do I really want to put a body in front of that?
Exactly. So very cool. I think this is a really cool one of the newer modifiers.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree.
but let's talk about one that's not so cool, and I think you know which one
Yeah,
I'm
oh, it's
talking
pretty
about.
vile if you'd say that.
Do
But
I
yeah,
take care
so
of Vile?
yeah, so Vile, basically it says destroy or deploy to destroy one of your creatures, and it's got that same deploy ability at all three levels. So Vile itself, it gives you a +3, a +4, and a +5 stat modifier. So I think it's the only modifier in Necrom from the set two that actually gives you positive stat buff. That being said, the cost is very, very high.
Hmm.
Um, so in a lot of situations, it's like if you have no creatures on the board and you draw your Vile creature, it's like, uh-oh, I'll play this to destroy it. Um, that being said, if you have something that might trigger off of a creature that destroyed, so like if you have a Shambler out or something of that nature, definitely could be strong. Like a Vile Butcher, or actually no, because Butcher only forget about that because you want to be slaying your opponent's creatures, not
Right.
one of your own.
Right.
Um, that being said, Vile really can kind of help with some of that self destruction combo ability, but the drawback is so large that's just like I've kind of ignored almost every Vile creature I've seen
Hmm.
that I've opened. But like being able to play a Vile creature with a Shambler on the board to just immediately get a destruction trigger on itself is not horrible if you like really need to push damage over the top. Like I've done that with a few of the creatures that destroy themselves like over time just to get that like little extra jab of life gain so then I could play like a Freeze Eris will. But it's like a really fringe case where I'd ever want to do that. And it's like in general, like maybe there will be a nice benefit to Vile in the future. I have a feeling that we might see it in set three with all of that self destruction synergy, but in set two, not for me.
Yeah. I think my biggest problem with it is that you're not increasing this creature's survivability by that much, and it's such a big cost and tempo hit to play the card.
Hmm.
The thing is that it's not an option, and it will destroy itself if it's your only creature. So,
Hmm.
um, even like I've heard the argument, oh, you can just destroy a wisp with it, but that wisp had a cost associated with it, right? Like
Yeah.
your minions do have a cost, and you know I'd rather have something like Hematophagic or Doom or Cutthroat that what I'm destroying, I'm getting some benefit out of.
Hmm.
Um, beyond just a couple points of stats. And I don't feel like the stats scale enough at the higher levels. Like +5 for a whole creature at at cycle 3 is not
Yeah.
enough, right? Like, I
No.
guess it could push a bit of damage, but it just doesn't feel like it's enough of a payoff for the drawback.
Yeah.
Now, if it read something like like if it was sort of like Apparition, where it said you may destroy one of your creatures to give it a certain amount of attack and health, that'd be totally different because at least you'd have the option of playing it. But
Hmm.
this is just too much for me. I can see, if you're stuck with this in your deck, there are going to be fringe, like 1 out of every 10 games where it makes sense to play this card as like maybe an underdrop. But I've not been impressed with it when I've been forced to play with it. And like, I have like a Vile Necromancer, and it's like, well, it doesn't make it that much more survivable. Like, I'm not trying to
No.
rumble with a Necromancer. I want to use it for its ability, and I don't want to have to lose a creature in the process to do that. So,
No. And like, thank goodness it's a rare modifier, because it's like,
yeah,
it's one of those, I think it's like one of those abilities where they're like, every ability can't be good. So we have to have some abilities that are just mostly drawback. So it's
right.
like, when you see these, it makes you really put into perspective how good some of the other abilities are. But it's like, I will say that, like, if I'm looking through a deck and it's got 9 great cards and 1 Vial, I kind of downgrade that deck a good amount when I'm searching
Right.
through and deck building, which is just like that one turn where you're like, wow, I actually have to play this Vial card and it's just going to destroy me. Like, uh-oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
It's just too much of a liability. I'd rather have. I mean, even with like the from Alpha Corrupt, like, yeah, you're getting the stat bonus and you're taking damage, right? You're not
yeah,
losing an action in the process.
I agree.
So yeah, not for me, but I'm sure it is probably stronger than we think it is because Stoneblade knows more than we do.
That is true. Like, set 4, this is probably going to be like a top tier ability.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. Yeah, you're gonna want as many file creatures as you can get.
For sure.
Yeah. So that brings us to our last Forge modifier. So let's talk about zombifying. So zombifying reads, your other creatures are also zombies. At level 1, there's no change to stat penalty. It's just combat. At level 2, same ability. Your other creatures are also zombies. And at level 3, you get a 1 point deficit, but all your creatures are zombies. It's a common modifier. It's a little bit more attack heavy at the end than combat is. So rather than having a 13-14, you have a 14-12. So, there's some interesting part of that. I'm a little disappointed that doesn't make itself a zombie.
I agree.
Because a lot of times, if you have a zombie payoff, it not affecting, like my scientist, it'd be nice if it could also affect itself. Is all I'm going to say about that.
Yeah.
But that said, you'll get this in a deck that doesn't have any zombie synergies, but because you have such a low stat penalty, doesn't really bother me. Like, I know it's kind of like a feels bad that you get a zombifying when you have no zombie payoffs, but it's really not, because I mean it's just like a combat. It's just kind of a vanilla thing. So you just treat it as like the creature, whatever the base creature is, that's what you're getting, right? So you can only
That
be but
makes
so
sense.
upset about it. So I try to rationalize it as the stat breakdown's fine. It's on curve. If I happen to get it in a deck where I get some zombie synergies going on, neat. But if not, I'm not too upset about it.
Yeah,
What about
and
you?
I will say that out of the creature types that something like this could give, I do like zombifying because there are payoffs for zombies.
Yeah.
So like, there are other abilities in this set that actually let you get, like, for example, all your other creatures are robots. And at that point it's like, there's a lot less robot payoff than there is zombie payoff. So it's
Exactly.
like,
Yeah.
I've definitely seen decks with zombifying and then commanding. So with zombifying, it makes them zombies, and then commanding will buff your zombies when it enters. So it's like, it's like you kind of could get that nice little payoff there.
Hmm.
But it's like, again, it's like one of those things where I've never actually had it be relevant that I've played a zombifying creature that has actually like made something a zombie where I'm like, yes, now it's a zombie. Now I'm gonna trigger this.
Right. Right.
So it's like, I guess if you have it with like even a few of the cards that we spoke about already, like Cold Heart Brute, like
Hmm.
you can do that and buff your board, but it's like very conditional. And it's like, I would almost want zombifying more for sealed than I would for constructed.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's fine. There's sometimes you get like a group meal with it. It can be cool, and
Yeah, that's true.
but the way it ends up usually playing out is that your deck probably already has plenty of zombies in it, and because the Nekrium minion is a zombie, usually the zombifying creature is the only creature that's going to be on the board that isn't a zombie
Yeah,
anyway. So like
it
the
is a
fact
good
that it doesn't
point.
hit itself is kind of a big whiff for me.
Yeah,
Uh,
for sure.
but maybe it was too powerful to have it affect itself. I don't know. But
Yeah.
it's fine. Um, but yeah, that's the last of our modifiers. So I think it's time to talk about our spells. And let's start it off with a bang with the Blight Skull Bomb.
So Blight Skull Bomb is a spell that has each enemy player destroys one of their creatures. You may give a spirit +1/+1 for each enemy creature in play. The level 2 is choose 2 enemy creatures. The enemy player must destroy 1, and then you may give a spirit +2/+2 for each enemy creature in play. And then finally, the level 3 is destroy an enemy creature. You may give a spirit +3/+3 for each enemy creature in play. So this is one of those cards where if you're playing a spirit heavy deck, it gives you a lot of value. Like especially like even was like the Grimgaunt, what was it called again?
The Harvester.
Grimgaunt Harvester.
Yeah.
Like that's one of those things where it's a spirit. Like if you have your opponent has a bunch of creatures, you destroy something, and you give a buff. It's like it's not bad. It's like one of those things where there are a lot of spirits in this set, especially in Nekrium, where like you will get a payoff likely when you have a Blight Skull Bomb in your deck. Now, obviously, the enemy destroying one of their creatures at level 1 is kind of a drawback because it's like they're probably going to destroy their wisp or whatever their worst creature is. But getting just unlimited or unrestricted removal at level 3 is definitely worth it for me, especially because the extra ability on the card is not a drawback in any way towards yourself. So it's like, yeah, you get to remove something. It may not be your choice, but you get a buff to finally, I'm going to destroy whatever creature I want, and I potentially get like a pretty large buff on the board. So it's like it's definitely a strong card. It's one of those things where like I've really only played against it in sealed, but it usually in a sealed format tends to be a pretty strong card, and it's one of those cards where I'm like, please don't have it in your hand, please don't have it in your hand,
Yeah.
and they always tend to have it when you really don't want them to have it. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah, for me, actually, I like this one quite a bit. I mean, so at level 1, it's basically a Necrovive. It's like a level 1
Yeah.
Necrovive at level 1. And, you know, the I almost never worry about the Spirit Claws. It's really nice to play it on a 1 creature board, right? Like, your
Yeah.
opponent makes a play, you play Blight Skull Bomb, they just nuke their first play, and then, you just, it's a, 1-for-1 action. At level 2, the fact that you get to they have to have 2 creatures out, so it's a little bit more finicky, and they're always going to choose the worst one. But that point, the buff is always going to trigger, right? You're going to get the +2/+2 because you're going to have at least 1 creature left. And if you have a spirit heavy deck, that could be very valuable. And at level 3, just flat out destroy whatever creature you want, and you get a pretty sizable buff to a spirit if you can, have enough spirit payoffs or enough spirit creatures, wisps or fathers or just, Nekrium spirits, which I believe there were, I counted 11 spirits in Nekrium in the set, so it's pretty well supported. The nice thing too is that the level 2 can often get around Krogius because you can choose 2 creatures that aren't Krogius if you can.
Yeah.
If you're facing up Krogius at that point, you're probably in a bad situation anyway. But unlike Necrovive, where it's a completely dead card, I like that, and I like that it's not level gated. Like you can take out a level 3 card with the level 1 Blight Skull Bomb if it's their only creature. So it's much more versatile than it looks, and the play pattern kind of changes with it as the game progresses, where you want fewer creatures on the board at the low level, and then at the higher level you want more creatures on the board when you're destroying to really pump up a spirit. So
I guess the only really downside is if your opponent only has 1 creature when you get the Blight Skull Bomb.
Yeah.
And it's just like for level 2, it's just like, uh-oh.
Yeah, I mean, that could be a problem. But often if it's like your second play of the turn, they'll usually have 2 creatures by then. It's,
That's true.
Or, you just save it for the next cycle. It's not the biggest deal. You use removal when you need to use it, right? So
Yeah, no, it's a good point.
I think that the potential payoff is nice. And again, if you miss it on cycle 1, it still has relevance in cycle 2, unlike often Dreadbolt, where it's always or Botanimate, where they're always a level behind. You can at least do something with it.
That's a great point.
And even at the level 1, if it's they have a full board. They kill their worst creature, but then you give a spirit +4/+4. That's not bad.
Yeah.
So I think it has a lot of interesting applications, and it's better than it looks at first glance, from my perspective.
No, I definitely agree there.
Yeah. So speaking about tribal cards, why don't we talk about Dark Shaper's Ritual? So this is the Nekrium version of the choose one, but if you have a beast in play, choose two instead. So the modes are: when a creature is destroyed this turn, you gain 2 health. The second mode is play a mindless zombie minion, and the third one is each enemy player must destroy one of their creatures. So basically Necrovive. At level 2, the health increase goes to 3 per creature destroyed and get 2 mindless zombie minions. Still just destroy one of the enemy creatures. And then at level 3, it's +4 health this turn for each destroyed creatures. You get 2 zombie brutes, and each opponent destroys one of their creatures. One thing to note about this card is that it says any creature destroyed, not just your creatures, so it's not like shambling in that regard. So if there's a full board where everything's going to trade, you can gain a ton of life off this card in one turn. Even at level 1, like if all 5 lanes are trading by some weird miracle, you can gain 20 life, I think, off this card in just one fell swoop. And that only gets bigger as the game goes on. It also produces bodies that can be destroyed, like as jump blockers to gain more life, or because the destroy clause, or the gain health clause happens first, you can gain health, destroy one of their creatures, kill a few more in combat, so you basically destroy a creature, gain some life. So there's a lot of like flexibility with this. It does require a beast. Beast is not as supported as most of the other creature archetypes. Like I think there's only 9 Nekrium beasts in the set, and there's however many in Utera. So you're probably going to want to pair this with Utera most of the time because there's not too many beasts in Tempest or in Aloyan.
Yeah.
And you really kind of need to have a beast in play to really make this pay off. Though I will say, if you're gunning into one of those combat situations where a lot of stuff's going to die, just playing it for the first mode can still be really good without having a beast in play. So for me, I think this is probably like the second best ritual after Elementalist Ritual.
I agree. 100%.
But what are your thoughts otherwise on this card?
No, I think this is a solid one. Like, this is a card that I've actually played quite a bit. I actually have it in a deck with a Darkheart Sorcerer that I paired with a Nova Elementalist deck that had some beasts on both ends, and it was a lot of fun to play because it's just like, again, it's like one of those things where it's like I ended up having a beast on the board almost every time I played this in that deck. Now, in general, all 3 abilities are strong. Like, just at level 2, getting 2 bodies, if that's the only thing you do, not horrible. Like, that's basically just like a Ghastly Renewal level 1 if you have a scientist on the field. So it's like the fact that you get that plus something else if you have a beast is just like a lot of value, like compared to some other factions and some other cards. But I actually had somebody play the level 2 Dark Shaper Ritual before combat. 5 creatures died and they gained 15, and I was just like, that was the first time I realized it's any creature and not just your own. And I was just like, this is incredible. This is so much better than I thought it was. And a lot of times I find with some of these cards I don't play often, someone will play it, I'll realize that it does more than I thought it did because I always just assume that a card's more restricted. And like, this is one of those cards that I assumed was more restricted, and then I was just like, all right, I need to find a deck with this so I can actually play it myself.
Yeah.
But the Necrovive at all levels, at the very worst, it's like, I'm thrilled with that.
Yeah, that's like the fail case, right? Is the Necrovive or the brute or the minions, right?
Yeah.
And it's not the worst, right? You still get to level it up. You get a body, or you take out one of their creatures. Especially, like we were talking about with Blight Skull Bomb. If it's their only creature, it can really take out a big target. So.
Oh yeah.
Don't sleep on that. And like, if it's their only creature, it's early in the game. You get a mindless zombie and you take it out. It's like an Om Nom Nom, or it's like Om Nom Nom only usually kills little things. This can kill a big thing. So
yeah.
I definitely,
no, I agree.
I definitely dig this card. I would definitely be on the lookout for decks, especially ones that have multiple beasts in it, because again, it's not a very supported creature type, so you're not going to find a high concentration. So getting like 2 or 3 beasts in a deck with a ritual is pretty high roll for it. So I'd be on the lookout for that. Our next spell is Death Current. Do you want to talk about Death Current?
Yeah, Death Current. So it's a spell that has deal 2 damage to a creature, you gain 2 life, and you give a creature 2 health. At level 2, Death Current has deal 4 damage to a creature, you gain 4 life, give a creature 4 health. And then finally, it has deal 6 damage to a creature, you gain 6 life, and you give a creature 6 health. So this is a card that is a lot stronger than I gave it credit for the first time I read it. And the reason being is that like when you kind of think of something like a Toxic Spores, that's like -3 +3, you don't gain life. And I would much rather like granted the 2 versus 3 is like kind of iffy. Like I'd rather obviously have 3 removal at a lower level. But the extra life gain is pretty strong when you're potentially going to have cards that will synergize with life gain.
Mm-hmm.
But as you scale this card up, like if you could get past level 1 and get value, getting to level 2, where you're gonna be like deal 4, gain 4, and give a creature 4 health, it's just like a Varric's Embrace plus.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like that's the kind of thing where it's like once you get past level 1 Death Current, it levels very well in my opinion, and it's a card that just tends to like really help you keep a creature alive during combat and remove something
Mm-hmm.
with the incidental life gain. So I like the card a lot. It's definitely it's not my favorite piece of removal, but it's one that if I see it, I'm not upset.
Yeah. Yeah, it does a lot of little things that add up to a pretty decent effect, but it is pretty situational, is what I'll say. If you don't have a life gain payoff in your other half, it is a bit on the weaker side. Again, Toxic Spores
Yeah,
just does more.
yeah,
Same with, like Venom Chalice, right? But there are going to be situations where you clean up a creature, gain some life, save one of your creatures from dying in that combat. And, it just does a lot of little things, but it's not a card that you're going to prioritize playing all the time, which
hmm
also makes it harder to keep it kind of on curve. That said, I think it does enough for what it is. One thing I do want to note about this is that the giving a creature +4 health is not optional. So if if you don't have any creatures on the board and they have one, and even if you kill one of them, the other one's going to have to get the 4 health. So just be careful.
yeah,
Just be aware of that. Otherwise, it's fine. It's not like a super wow card, but it's nice and tidy. It does, just a lot of little things added up together to
yeah.
make it worth a card.
That's a good point.
And speaking of Varric's Embrace, let's talk about the Evil Lab. So, Evil Lab is a new Exalt. It reads Deploy, deal 3 damage to a creature, you gain 3 health. And then it has the clause when you play a scientist in this lane, give it +2/+2, and then destroy this. The damage goes to 5, and the drain goes up to 5, and +3/+3 for the scientist at level 2, and then 7 and +4/+4 to the scientist at level 3. So it's like 1 point lower than Varric's Embrace from set 1, with a lot of additional upside potentially. So you're taking a little bit of a hit on the amount of damage it deals, which makes it better at cleaning up creatures than it is just taking out creatures outright. But it can kill most minions in the first cycle besides spell sprites. And the scientist payoff, there's not a ton of scientists, right? And they're not always the ones that you really want to buff per se. But it is a nice card that as like fodder for something like a Devourer, or in the upcoming set where it cares about having a certain number of exalt, or having the exalted ability, or even like with Cold Heart Brute where you want to have extra exalts on the board. So having that sort of like left behind aspect gives it a little bit of an edge, I feel like, over Varric's
I agree.
Embrace.
Definitely agree.
Yeah, so it's an interesting card. I'm not unhappy to see it. But again, its breakpoint is a little low. You're probably gonna take on a minion. I don't really prioritize it for the scientist aspect of it, to be honest.
hmm
Usually the scientists are small and they're gonna die anyway, so giving them a couple extra health points is not always worth it. But it's there. It's a value, so
Yeah.
it's not worth discounting.
No, I agree. And it's one of those things where I definitely don't play too many constructed decks with Evil Lab, but I've played quite a few sealed decks with Evil Lab.
Hmm.
And I've found that the payoff tends to typically hit like a Dr. Frankenbaum
Yeah.
or like or a Bride of Frankenbaum, I guess, as well.
Hmm.
I guess that's one of those things where it's like if you play this and then play a Bride afterwards, like it might get it to a break point where you're going to feel a little bit better about its stats. But if
That's
your
true.
opponent is playing smart, they're going to see that Evil Lab, see the Bride of Frankenbaum in your deck, and then be like, ooh, you know what? I'm not going to put creatures in that lane.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
that being said, like you said, a lot of times when I've played it, it tends to just be hey, I'm going to deal the damage to a creature and gain the life, just like the Varric's Embrace. And then, like, again, like sometimes like it'll force me to play the scientist that I wouldn't have played otherwise to get the buff so I could get like value out of it. And it's like that kind of play style is not what I like. Like I don't want to play a card because I get value out of my evil lab, but sometimes it's just like in this situation, I guess I could justify playing the scientist instead of playing my other card, which I'd rather have. And like as a result, it's like I'd almost rather have a Varric's Embrace. But if you're playing a very scientist heavy deck, it's like I could definitely justify it.
Yeah, I mean, this basically replaced Varric's Embrace from the first set, I
Yeah,
feel like, so.
I agree.
But it's fine. You know, it has its role to play. And I think it has... It's greater than the sum of its parts, essentially, right? It does a little bit more than it appears at first glance.
Yeah, and like I know you mentioned Cold Heart Brute, but Devourer is another one where it's like if you play the Evil Lab, you don't have a scientist. At least this is an Exalt you don't feel bad destroying.
Yeah, exactly. It also buffs up your Rageborn Eruptors, and you know it helps with your Mustic Megathas. You know, so it does more than it looks like it'll do. But yeah, so moving on, let's talk about the Red Wasteland. Do you want to talk about the Wasteland?
Sure. So Red Wasteland at level 1 is deploy. You may destroy one of your creatures, and then when one of your creatures is destroyed before combat, give your creature in this lane +2/+2. At level 2, it says deploy to destroy your level 1 Red Wasteland. You may destroy one of your creatures to play a card for free. And then when one of your creatures is destroyed before combat, give your creature in this lane +3/+3. And then finally, the level 3 has deploy, destroy level 1 and level 2 Red Wasteland. You may destroy one of your creatures to play a card for free. And when one of your creatures is destroyed before combat, give your creature in this lane +5/+5. So this is definitely, in my opinion, one of the stronger exalts in this set. It's one that, unfortunately, I haven't played as much as I would like. But just in general, being able to play cards for free, and any card for me, is so much value. Especially when in Nekrium you want to potentially be destroying one of your own creatures. Like, there's a lot of things that could reanimate. There's a lot of things where you're generating minions. And, like, even at the cost, like, sometimes you might have, at level 3 or level 2, you might have a couple big cards in your hand that you'd just be happy to replace another creature with, but then the fact that you're able to buff with destruction before combat, it just like it's definitely nice in terms of getting value when you play the Red Wasteland right away. But I've found it definitely also is really hard to play against on the other side, where it's like if I have removal and I don't want to destroy the creature that's in the Red Wasteland lane, I have to be really careful about not destroying too many of their creatures pre-combat, because I find that like I've done it before where it's like I'll destroy something that I need to destroy, and now it's just like the creature that was in this lane is now completely out of range of death, and I'm just like, ugh, was it worth the trade-off? Like it does a lot more than I think you expect at face value. Like, what's your thoughts?
I think the fact that you know you don't get a free card on the first level, which is fine. I think you need some drawback at the first level to kind of get it going. So you can still destroy one of your creatures to basically give something +2/+2 for the turn, the turn you play it. So at level 1, it's a little bit on the weaker side, but once you get to start playing free cards with it, that's when it really starts to pay off. Now, one thing I will note is that there are some really cool like cards that you can repeatedly kill your creatures, like the Keeper of the Damned, right? You can just keep cycling through that minion over and over again to pump it up. It's really great in the Keeper of the Damned lane, because you're making the Keeper of the Damned harder and harder to kill. It gets bigger and bigger. Another place where it's kind of cool is with Indomitable Fiend or Zimus, where you can the way you can stack, like when it becomes destroyed pre-combat, you can reanimate it before you resolve the Red Wasteland trigger, so you can give it that buff after it comes back. So that's a way to kind of get them above their curve. So I like it when it's in the same deck as those cards as well. So you're sacrificing that creature, but you're rebuffing it on the side. So I think that's a pretty cool card to look out for. But yeah, Keeper of the Damned is great to look for with this, and those two creatures especially. I'm trying to think if there's a lot more self-destruction creatures in this set that you're really trying to do that with, but mostly I feel like it's Nyx abilities. So you'll probably see this in a Nyx deck a lot. But I think it's a really cool card. It does, like you said, it does discourage people from destroying your creatures outside of combat unless they're going to destroy the one in the Red Wasteland. And I think after a couple turns, that's the one they're going to need to kill anyway because it's going to be huge. So
No, for
it's
sure.
it's pretty strong against Aloyan slash Tempe's, right? Because they don't really have ways to just straight up destroy creatures or replace them.
Yeah.
So that's
I
something to keep an eye out for.
Yeah, and I will say when my opponent plays the Red Wasteland, I usually am just like, and like
Yeah,
I'm just like, oh, now I have to figure out how I'm going to handle this. So
yeah,
it's like it's definitely a card that makes an impact. Like as soon as you see it, it's just like, oh, why do they have to play it?
yeah, yeah, for sure. And like if you can skip the first level, like with an upgrade, and just play it at second level, so you get your free card, destroy a minion, give something a bonus, play an extra card, it gets really really strong.
Yeah, and I feel like there might be a spell that we talk about very shortly that could potentially help if you have them both.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about Runescarred Pit. So, Runescarred Pit's another Exalt. Probably one of the strongest Exalts in the set. But what
Hmm.
it reads is at level 1, you deploy it. You play a Zombie Brute in the lane. So you're getting a level 2 minion right off the bat in cycle 1. And then it reads when you play any level 2 or level 3 Runescarred Pit, you may play a Zombie Brute in this lane. At level 2, you play a Zombie Brute in this lane, and then it reads when you play any level 3 Runescarred Pit, you may play a Zombie Brute in this lane. And then deploy at level 3, you get the Zombie Brute in this lane. When you play another Runescarred Pit, you may play a Zombie Brute in this lane. So what that means is that first level, you're getting one Zombie Brute. At second level, you're refilling your first Zombie Brute and getting a second one, so you get two. Level 3, you get 3 Zombie Brutes, one in each of the Runescarred Pit lanes. So you're dumping out a ton of stats. Zombie Brutes are not to be, trifled with. They have a lot of synergies with things like Cold Heart Brute, Commanding. I think, the consensus is a pretty good card. One thing to note is that the way it's templated, it will look at Betrayer Runescarred Pits as well. So if you have a Betrayer, it will trigger your other Runescarred Pits, provided that they're of the appropriate level. So that's kind of a cool thing. If you can fill up all 5 lanes with Runescarred Pits, it's
It's
pretty
funny
epic.
because I was actually just looking that up as you said it. I was just like, I know Thunder Crash Field does not do the Betrayers. I
Yeah,
found that out today actually, so I was just like, oh, does Runescarred Pit? And then you said it, and I was just like, you saved me a couple types, a
yeah,
couple
yeah,
keystrokes. No, that's
yeah,
incredible.
yeah. So I mean, granted they're just 6/6s, but if you have good minion synergies, if you have things like Transcendent Biologist or Lycian Rain from
Hmm.
Alpha, um, these can put in a lot of work. But what's your feeling? How's been your experience?
Oh, I like this card. It kind of feels like the replacement for Cersei's Call in my eyes because it's
Hmm.
like with Cersei's Call, like granted at level 1 you get between 1 and I guess up to 5 mindless zombie minions. Where here it's like yes you get 1 brute, but at level 2 like a lot of times you're getting 2 to 3 brutes in a good Cersei's Call turn, and you're automatically getting 2 as long as
Hmm.
someone didn't destroy your exalt or you didn't replace your exalt. So it's like granted, you have to kind of keep your Runescarred Pit lanes clear in order to be able to make sure you can get them once you get to the next cycle.
Right.
That being said, though, it's one of those cards where it feels pretty strong to play. Like especially at a common, like I saw this card and I was just like immediately like, wow, this is a good card. Like
Yeah.
it was very easy to evaluate, and it was like just like, hey, like I will happily get 18 zombie brute power at level 3
Yeah.
and just feel really happy about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love this card.
Yeah, you make up a good. You do have a good point about being careful how you place your creatures in the pit lane. So you kind of want to gauge kind of where you are in the cycle when you put creatures in a pit lane. That you know, if you're like on turn 2 of the cycle, then and you've already played your pit for that cycle, then you can probably safely put it in the lane, assuming that it'll die before you get to your next pit, or it'll be low enough health that you're gonna replace it with the brute without feeling bad about it. That kind of a thing.
Hmm.
It's also good if you have ways to destroy it. I don't think Dreadmaw is in this set, but there are probably other things that you can sacrifice the brute to, and then play your next rune's card pit and replace it. So
Yeah,
to
I
keep
guess
the lane
Doom.
clear. Doom, yep. You got your Doom. You got your Vial. I guess it's good with Vial.
Yeah,
But
that's true. But I will say though that it's just one of those things where I've definitely blocked off my RuneScarp hit lanes before, and then
mhm.
I've drawn it. And I'm just like, oh. And it's
Yeah,
like sometimes it's just like, yeah, I'll play it anyway, and I'll just decide not to get the brute. I do appreciate the fact that they put makes. I could have definitely seen them just say, like play a zombie brute in each of these lanes is kind of like
Yeah,
a little bit of a drawback.
right.
But like at the end of the day, like if you replace your Dark Heart with a brute, you'll feel bad. But if you replaced your Wisp with your brute, like you would have felt good. But I'm
Mhm.
glad that they made this a May because I could have seen them go either way with that.
Yeah, and that also like goes to the point of when you're playing against a rune scarred pit that you can prioritize putting your creatures that you know would survive a zombie brute in that lane, so that you're kind of putting your opponent to the test of, well, do I put a big creature to block that guy, knowing that I might have to replace it later? Like so there is some interplay there that becomes interesting. So just keep an eye out when you're playing against it.
Mhm.
At the same time, don't be afraid to just keep your, keep playing your Runescarred Pits, even if it's going to mean
Yeah,
replacing it or not getting the extra benefit, because it will pay off in the long run.
I will say I hate playing against this card because it's like the whole time you just look at it on the board and you're just like, uh-oh, this is
Yeah,
potentially going to become another big body for very little like cost.
yeah, and you never know when it's going to hit too. So,
Yeah.
yeah. All right, so let's talk about Shadow Strength. Do you want to take over this one?
Sure, yeah. Shadow Strength has it's a spell that gives a level 1 creature +3 attack. This turn it gets stealth. At level 2, it says this is free, and then give a level 1 or level 2 creature +5 attack, and then this turn it gains stealth. And then finally at level 3, it's also free, and it says give a creature 7 attack. This turn it gains stealth. So this is a card that kind of reminded me of Aegis Wings, was the very first thing I thought of when I saw
Yeah,
it. But instead of getting mobility, you're getting stealth, which in some ways the mobility is better. In some ways I don't hate the fact that this has stealth. I've never actually seen somebody cast a Shadow Strength for 3. Like honestly, like a lot of times people when they have it in their deck just tend to not play it. Um, that being said, like I did see a level 1 Shadow Strength get cast on a Nova element, or sorry, a Rumble Spark element embodiment that then got stealth after being huge. So it's like that was like the nice one little payoff that I saw for it, where it just I think it might have been like the lethal move with the Shadow Strength to be able to push the final damage above. Well, no, I couldn't. It wasn't the level 3.
yeah,
It wasn't the level 1. So it wasn't the Rumble Spark. It was something else.
yeah. It had to have been something
Um,
else.
it was something though. But yeah, it's just the fact that it's level gated is kind of brutal because it's not a great underdrop. So if you miss it in level 1, it's just like kind of eh. But like you have to have a level 1 creature early on, or you need to upgrade it. At level 2, it's also level gated, which makes it kind of brutal, but it is free. So as long as you
Hmm.
have like worst case, if you have a level 1 or level 2 creature, it's free and you get a buff.
Right.
If you're off Forge, it's like who cares? If you're on Forge, the stealth could be beneficial. But it's just like in general, like I look at it as a hey, we're gonna get a stat buff. Maybe it's free. I saw the card the first time. I'm like, I'm gonna play this a lot, and I found myself not prioritizing it at all.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like you kind of you need a way to skip the first level if possible.
Yep.
It doesn't do enough on its own unless you're doing something like triggering rumbles, like the rumble spark energy with it, right? Like you just need that stealth to get it through. But to your point with Aegis Wings and the mobility issue, I do like that Aegis Wings is not level gated, but I have found frequently
Yeah.
that the mobility doesn't always work the way you want it to. Like you can't actually move it to a spot that's any more beneficial, or you have
That's
too many
true.
creatures on the board. Whereas this, like if you're already in front of something on the back row, the stealth just does what it needs to do. Um,
Yeah.
but the fact that it's free at level 2 and level 3, like you're gonna find a level 2 creature to put this on, right?
Yeah.
And the last level is you're always gonna find something to play it on once you get past the first level. It's just getting past
Yeah.
that hump. It's very good in like a spell heavy synergy deck, like with Tempe's as well, with spell sprites and things like that.
For
Like
sure.
even just throwing this on a spell sprite, right? Like that's not so bad. At the level 1, right? You get +5 to the spell sprite and give it stealth. It's
Yeah.
not bad.
Yeah.
But it's fine. It has its role to play.
Yeah. It's one
Um,
of those cards I feel like I maybe need to just force myself to play it a little more because I was really excited when it was spoiled.
yeah, I would give it another go, and try and prioritize it a little bit more, because I've found situations where I can play it at level 1 and it's not bad. It does pay off later in the game,
Yeah.
especially if you're playing aggressively. If you have an aggressive deck, like I wouldn't put it in I wouldn't prioritize it in a controlling deck, but definitely in an aggressive deck, you can push a lot of damage with it. All
Makes
right,
sense.
so that brings us to our last spell, I believe, which is the Witherfrost Circle, which we talked about a little bit earlier. So this is another Exalt. It says deploy, give a creature -2 attack, -2 health. And then it reads, when an enemy creature is destroyed in this lane, upgrade a level 1 card in your discard pile. One thing to note is that the buff, the deploy ability, does not have to target the creature in the same lane. So it's not
Yes.
opposing. Level 2, it gives -4/-4. You have to destroy your previous circle, and then you get to upgrade any kind of card when a creature is destroyed in the lane. And the final ability is destroy your level 1 and 2, give a creature -6/-6, and then it reads, when an enemy creature is destroyed in this lane, play a random card from your discard pile. So this is wild. I'll be honest, I've not played with this a ton, but I have heard stories. It's an okay upgrade payoff. It'll finish off a creature or make a favorable trade in combat. You get your free little upgrade. It's a little awkward on turn 1 of the cycle, or when you don't have anything in your banish pile or in your discard pile. But beware of the level 3 ability because it's not a May.
Yes.
So you could play a card you really don't want to, like, oops, I guess I'm playing Firestorm and destroying all my own creatures. So just be careful with it. But otherwise, anytime you get a free card play we know it's strong in this game, especially because there are ways to line this up where you play like a level 2 card, it dumps the level 3 card in your discard pile. It's your only other card, then you play this and you get to play that one card. So when you're getting into cycle 3, you have a little bit more choice and you have a little bit more of a opportunity to manipulate, especially on the first turn of the cycle, what card is going to be played for free with this. But yeah, I think it's a cool card. The stat, the kill, the kind of creature it's gonna kill, it's usually gonna finish off something rather than just straight up kill something. But even in cycle 1, you can take out a Gizmo or a Wisp pretty easily while people are still setting up and get a free upgrade out of it. So yeah. What are your thoughts?
I will say I've played with it a little bit. I've played against it more than I've played with it. I have noticed that a lot of times the level 1 doesn't tend to upgrade as much as you would like, because it's kind of like a worse Necromancer in the sake of, like, when you have a Necromancer on the first turn, you can't upgrade anything if you have a level 1 Necromancer. Now imagine this is in a level 1 for the entire cycle where it's like something needs to die in that lane. So it's like, if the Weatherfrost Circle makes it past cycle 1 and you've maybe upgraded one card if you're lucky, sometimes none, it gets really hard to start upgrading more before you either draw your next Weatherfrost Circle or before your opponent just doesn't play creatures in that lane as often. It's just one of those things where it's like, I don't see the second ability trigger as much as I thought I would have when I first saw this card. Now, did you hear about what happened during Gen Con with this, with Purple Christie?
I think I did, but I don't remember the exact story, so why don't you tell?
So I don't know what the opponent had on the board, but Christie had a Witherfrost Circle level 3, destroyed a creature, and then ended up having one other or I don't know how many creatures were on her side of the board, but their opponent had none. So basically, she ended up picking up a Grave Pact, where she had to sacrifice one of her creatures to destroy a creature, and she had to play it because it's play a random card from the pile, and then she had to kill her other creature as well. So instead of just like getting any value out of it, she literally ended up like destroy a creature to then destroy 2 of her own. And I think she said it lost her the game. Like, I'm 90% sure she lost from it. But like, I feel like that's the ultimate feel bad from Witherfrost Circle, would be either hitting like a Firestorm or like a Grave Pact with your opponent having nothing on the board. Most cases you'll at least get something beneficial, but like, I kind of enjoy the roll the dice. Like, granted, in a competitive game, like, you don't want to leave RNG up to like am I gonna get something that's playable or not? But like, it's still fun, and like, I feel like that's a story that she will never forget in a game.
Yeah, I mean, it creates a very epic moment, right?
I wish that was in the storyline instead of in the actual Gen Con tournament, because I feel like they could have written like a Gen Con storyline like article about that specific deck if that was the case.
Yeah, I think it must have been in the sealed, because I know she was playing a set 1 deck in her.
Yeah, then it probably was sealed
in the championship. So, but yeah, beware. Just be cognizant of it. But yeah, like, I agree, it doesn't always upgrade as much as you'd think it would, especially since your opponent can play around it once it's on the board by not putting creatures in its lane. But there are sometimes, like, I found, where you can like kind of force your opponent to put something there, right? And be able to trade stuff off. So I need to try this with like taunting creatures and see how that goes. That could be
Ooh,
fun.
that would be really interesting.
I just thought of that as we were talking. So
Yeah,
I have yet to find a deck that has multiple taunting in it, but I need to look for one of those. I
yeah.
think that could be a lot of fun. Um,
I'll look to see if I have any. I hope I do.
yeah, that'd be cool. We'll have to talk after
Yeah,
this for sure.
for sure.
So that's the last of the spells. So we just have 5 more cards to talk about, which are the Soul Binds, which is technically 1 in 5 cards. But why don't we start with Chanting of the Abyss? So do you want to take it away with Chanting?
Sure. So arguably the strongest card in the set. No, I'm just kidding. But Chanting of the Abyss, it's a spell and an exalt. So deploy, you may give a creature in this lane +5 health, and then creatures in this lane cannot be destroyed by Muthral's ability. At level 2, or do we want to go into the Soulbind?
Yeah,
Or
let's
are we
talk about
going
what the
into
Soul Binds are. So
Yeah.
we'll talk about what Mothral is, and we'll talk about what he is, how we get to it
Yeah.
later.
So Muthral is a 15/30 with aggressive breakthrough. When Muthral is transformed, destroy all other creatures, then destroy all exalts. So looking at Muthral, pretty incredible card, I will
Yes.
say. Just as stats, like 15/30, like really strong. The fact that it basically destroys everything else, like looking at this card at face value, it's like really, really good. Like I saw this, I think, before I saw the rest of the card, and I was so excited for Muthral, and I was
Yeah.
like, oh man, I can't wait to make it. And then
And then we looked at what the card says. So let's go back
yeah,
to how Chanting of the Abyss progresses.
yeah.
So level 2.
So deploy, you may give a creature in this lane 10 health, and then creatures in this lane can't be destroyed by Muthral's ability. And then finally at level 3, Chanting of the Abyss says, deploy, you may give a creature in this lane 15 health, then you may play, or then play Impending Doom, and then creatures in this lane cannot be destroyed by Muthral's ability. So Impending Doom is at the start of the turn, if this is the 4th desk cycle, transform this and put it into one of your empty lanes. So basically, the reason
That's
why
the
this
kicker.
card, yeah, it's like I saw that and I read it twice because I was just like, did I just read that right? Oh, because it's like I don't like cards that specifically limit me. Like Abyssal was kind of like, I don't like having to be able to do something at the end of the deck cycle. Like I like my ability to happen guaranteed. So the fact that you have to get to cycle 4 in a format where a lot of people are playing a lot of very quick decks, it's just I saw this and I was just like, well, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to flip this because you have to have played all 3 levels and you need to start a turn during cycle 4, and it's just like there's a lot of work you need to do.
Right.
But like that doom is really impending. Like you're really chanting, you're putting a lot of work in. Like your vocal cords are going to be sore from all that chanting you're doing into that abyss. But like I will say I've never seen this flipped. I don't think I've ever even seen impending doom get played. But like the part that's interesting is so creatures in this lane cannot be destroyed by Muthral's ability. That includes your opponent's creatures as well. So it's like if you want Muthral to wipe the board, it's almost like you have to keep replacing Chanting of the Abyss with itself.
Yeah.
And then at the very end, like I guess you could have one lane. Because I think the Impending Doom says it has to be in an empty lane, right?
No, you can put it in.
Oh,
the
does
same
it?
lane.
Oh,
you
cool.
You can replace.
Oh, if you transform and then it's into the Muthral has to be into an empty lane.
No, it doesn't.
I mean, so on the other side, it said transform. Yeah, I remember reading that somewhere as we were talking.
Yeah.
I will say I was talking to Tater Tot, and he was like, hey, I have a Betrayer Impending Doom, and I tried it. And I think he said he got it off once, if I'm not mistaken. But he played that many, many, many times. But we had a conversation about it, and I was like, wow, I'd love to see that deck. But then I think to myself, like, the amount of effort you have to go through playing this over and over and over again just to force that flip is, like, impressive. Like,
right.
Yeah, I feel like that might be the only way that he plays a Necron deck as well.
Right, and so the thing about this too is right, you put out the chanting lanes into lanes. It's protecting both sides of the board. So, your opponent can try and protect their creature as well if you don't have an easy way of replacing the chanting. So you are incentivized to try and kind of replace it over and over again. If you think that you're only going to have like one creature by the time you get to Doom, and flip Muthral, and you're going to be able to wipe the rest of your opponent's board in that turn, things have to line up really, really well for that to actually happen. Like you said, we can replace the Abyss with Impending Doom. If you have none on the board, everything gets wiped and you get a Muthral out, which is a 15/30 aggressive and breakthrough, but it's not a Krogius. It can still be killed, and it happens at the very beginning of the turn, which means your opponent has 2 actions to take care of it. Yep. So it's not exactly a game ender, and even 15 attack is not enough to and the game right then and there, like they can probably have something they can at the very worst chump with before, and start to rebuild off of. So it's very, very splashy, but it doesn't really play out as well in practice as you'd hope.
I
So
was talking to Fletch a little bit about this when we were talking about, because every time like he's reached out and been like, "Oh, here's your spoiler," I'm like, "Is this the one that's gonna break Chanting of the Abyss?" And I keep joking. I'm like, "There's gonna be a card. I know. Like this is like there's gonna be something that breaks this, right?" And he did mention like it is kind of a card that they probably did a little conservatively compared to where it could have been. But maybe that's just him saying that. So when they eventually drop a card, that's just gonna be like transform a card like automatically without having to like
go through the
or
hoops.
you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
maybe they'll do that one day. I don't know. But like there could be something, and I'm hoping that one day there'll be a card that makes Methral like something that I really want to play. But like I guess at the end of the day when you play Chanting of the Abyss, you have to play it as just like I'm gonna give a buff of my health to my creatures, which at the end of the day it's not like the worst health buff you could think of, because it's like how much is it at level 1? Because it's 15 at level 3, which is not bad.
Yeah, it's
It's
like 5,
5.
10, 15. So it's on par kind of with Lead the Charge minus the ready ability, right? So,
Yeah. So
I
it's
mean,
like
it definitely gives things survivability, and if you get it in a Glorfclob deck, it could be
that
really
is
cool.
true. Now I need to check to see if any of my Chanting of the Abysses have Glorf Club.
Yeah, mine does
Because
not.
a lot of times I will look at Chanting of the Abyss and I'll just be like, oh, the deck is dead to me. Um, and like, granted, like sometimes I do that too quick. But I guess with the amount of decks I have, sometimes I just have to make that decision and be like, you know what, I'm not going to look into this and I'm probably not going to play it. But
Yeah.
if I have any, while we're talking, I might just search while we're talking about the next card.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll lead off on the next card. So I think that's enough to talk about with
Yeah,
Muffle.
for
It's
sure.
it's splashy, but it doesn't really play out as well as you'd want it to. So a lot of things have to line up to make it work, and it's a lot of effort to go through for not a guaranteed payoff.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the next one. This one is Devour Soul. So Devour Soul reads, give a creature -2 attack, -2 health. If this destroys a creature, you may play a Soul Gorger. What's a Soul Gorger? Well, Soul Gorger is a level 2, 3/6 spirit with stealth that has, when you play a spell, gives this 3 attack. So it's like a big stealthy spell sprite. At level 2 of Devour Soul, it gives a -5, -5. Again, if you destroy a creature, you get a Soul Gorger. And then at level 3, it gives -8, -8, and you get a Soul Devourer, which is a 6/10 that gets +4 whenever you play a spell, and it has stealth. I like this card a lot, actually.
Hmm.
This is like a supercharged Om Nom Nom, and the progression is identical, except that the first level you only get -2, -2 instead of -3, -3. But the body you get out of it is so much more impactful.
Yeah.
I actually have this in a deck that has 6 spells in it. It's a very spell heavy deck with a lot of removal, and if I can get the first one off, it becomes this sort of like recurrent threat that is a combination of removal and a creature. That's a decent body, and you keep triggering the attack buff, so they have to deal with it. And usually they can't deal with it the first turn you play it. So
Yeah.
it's a pretty big threat. What's been your experience with Devour Soul?
I've actually never seen anybody play it against me, and I've never played it. I do have a Betrayer Devour Soul in Aloyan that I picked up
Oh,
off an eBay sale, and I'm so excited to eventually play it. And maybe that's another like I keep every time we talk about these cards, I'm like, oh, I need to build around this. But
yeah,
this is a card I feel like I want to build around and try. Like, granted, at level 1, like as I've been like looking at it and saying like, hey, in this situation, like would I want to play the level 1? Like, I do think that it's going to be hard to necessarily get your Soul Gorger
yeah,
at level 1, because I found at Om Nom Nom even at cycle 1 like tends to be like maybe I'm not going to kill something, but at least I'll get it at a lower power
yeah,
or of that nature. So it's like as an underdrop, if you miss it, giving something -2, -2 in cycle 2 or 3 or whatever, it's just going to be so hard to potentially get that Soul Gorger.
hmm
So I feel like it's one of those cards that if you could upgrade it out of cycle 1, you're golden.
yeah. I mean, this is a card that you don't necessarily build around, but it's a very effective card in the deck. That, like, if it
Yeah.
lines up, it's very swingy.
Yeah.
That's how I found when I've played with it, and it's really good at taking out gizmos and wisps and finishing
Oh,
off
yeah.
creatures, especially on those early setup turns where you're like, oh, I'll play an energy surge and upgrade a card and play a gizmo, and then I'll take a little bit of a tempo hit, and then they're like devour soul, and you're like, oh, that's like devastating, and I've done that several
Yeah.
times.
Okay,
So
that's a good point. You've definitely sold me.
yeah,
I want to try this.
so because there's a lot of those cards that will make wisps or make gizmos that don't have a lot of that are sort of like setup cards, right? That aren't really strong on their own, but they're like upgrading or like playing for free plays later, or you get like your nano swarm that you mix with a scientist or whatever, and Centetta's lab, right? Like there's all these little like ways of making gizmos that this just like completely wrecks if you can draw it at the right time.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's a great point.
and I've had turns where I've drawn it and I'm like, well, I can't really afford to play this right now. It's not going to kill anything, and it's not worth upgrading, and it's big whoop. Like it's not a big deal.
That's true.
You just move on with your life. It's not like your deck revolves around it, and it's not like Rumble Spark where it just keeps coming back over and over again. You're only ever going to get it at most the 3 times. So, yeah, it's
a great
fine.
point.
Yeah, I like it though. I think it's a very solid card, and I like it much more than Nom Nom Nom. So.
That's a great point. I'm gonna have to give it a try.
Yeah, I would definitely give it a try. I think it plays a lot better than it looks at first glance.
Makes sense. Like just looking every time I've seen Soul Devourer, like it's just like, oh, I want to put that on the board so bad.
Well, I'll have to play you a game with my Soul Devourer.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
Maybe after this, if you have time.
Yeah,
we'll give it a whirl. But let's move on to one of our last few soul binds. Let's talk about General's Wrath. Do you want to give this one a go?
Yeah, I'm happy to. This is a cool one, so if you want to take this one, I totally understand too.
I actually don't have one yet, so I'd love to hear
Really?
your opinion.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so General Zareth is a 5/4, and it's a zombie, and it says deploy, play a Harvesting Ground. So Harvesting Ground is a level 2 spell that's an Exalt, where your creatures in this lane are also zombies. When you play a zombie, put a counter on this. Then if there are 5 or more counters on this, transform it. It transforms into Ziggurat of Zareth. So your creatures in this lane are also zombies, and then when one of your creatures in this lane is destroyed, deal 2 damage to the enemy player, you gain 2 life. So it's basically a level 2 Shambler on an Exalt. Then level 2, General Zareth, is a 7/5 with deploy, give your other zombies +2/+2. And finally, level 3, General Zareth, is a 10/7 with activate, give your other zombies +3/+3. So I have a few decks with General Zareth. Every time that you could get it to land, it can be so good, especially if you have other zombies in the deck. So we were talking about zombifying. I feel like General Zareth is a great card for zombifying for when you potentially could buff your whole board. That being said, I think a lot of people get very excited specifically about the Exalt with General Zareth, and that's kind of where the focus is. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to basically be able to play the zombies, flip it over, and get a uninteractable Shamble, basically, in terms of that Exalt, there's quite a few combos that people have been looking at that kind of deal with it. So basically, if you could kind of infinitely kill your own creatures, so like Indomitable Fiend is a great card that combos with Ziggurat, and then you can basically have something like a Flameshaper Savant. So it's like you keep playing the level 1 Indomitable Fiend, you kill it with the Savant trigger, it dies, it immediately reanimates, gets played again, dies, and then you could basically just infinitely shamble your opponent to death. And instead of having to have a Shambler that can be killed on board, you basically could have just like one of the pieces of the combo is just uninteractable.
Right.
So that's kind of where this card shines. But where I've actually found benefit from this is actually from the zombie tribal side. So the deck that I have that I like the most with my General Zareth actually has a Betrayer Glowhive Nursery, and then I think it also has like a Cold Heart Brute. So it's basically I can put the brutes into the lanes, or the zombies into the lanes with the Glowhive Nurseries, and then use the General Zareth to buff my zombies. So it's like that was definitely a pretty fun list to play, and it's one that like I have quite a few like minion decks based around that, and it's something that I need to play more. But like it's almost like the fact that like General Zareth kind of feels a little bit like a Shard King in terms of the way that it plays, because it's like you get your like the deploy is just get your Exalt, and then you're buffing your creature as it deploys, then you're buffing your creatures as an activate. But like the fact that it's like health and attack can be really strong. I like this card a lot, and it's a card that like if my opponent has it and has at least 2 zombies in their deck, I'm usually just like, oh,
or like a range card pit or something.
Yeah, it just favorably helps them so much in combat. So a lot of times you might like set up against some brutes that are already got some damage against them. You're planning to kill them in combat, then they play the General Zareth level 2, and then you're just like, well, that sucks. And
Yeah.
then the fact that it makes anything in the lane with the Ziggurat, the zombie as well, like basically makes it just even better because it's like whatever you put there is gonna get buffed.
Yeah, for sure.
So what are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's really cool. I think it's just kind of the right amount of balance. I mean, obviously there's that infinite combo with the Indomitable Fiend, but um, it takes a little while to get the Ziggurat transformed, right? Like unless if you don't, especially if you don't have a lot of minion generation on this side of the deck, or a bunch of the zombifying creatures or whatnot. So it's gonna take time. It doesn't really flip too early. So that's nice. I think it's just solid. I mean, I don't think it's overpowered. I think it, it it's just kind of a neat little package, right? I don't think
Yeah.
it's a nice build around too. Like this is one of those soul mines where you kind of want to tailor your deck towards it, whereas something like Devour Soul is not really like you're not building around Devour Soul so much as just using it as a pawn, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
And we have also seen ways to kind of in set 3, like potentially move exalts, like
mm-hmm.
deal with exalts a little better. So it's like this now might not be an automatic like, hey, I'm gonna have that ability at
Right.
all times. So it's like I think it'll be interesting to see how set 3 balances this card out. But I will say I'm surprised to not see as many General Zareth decks out in the wild, people playing them because it could be really strong.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. All right, what have we got next? I think we just have two left. So next one is Necrolord Yorick. So Necrolord Yorick is a 3/6 mage, and it reads Slay. You may play a potent zombie. What is a potent zombie? It is a 3/5 zombie that has Activate. Destroy this to give a creature +3 attack. At level 2, you get to have a 5/10 Yorick that plays a charge zombie when you slay something. That happens to be a 5/8 that destroys itself to give a creature +5 attack. And then at the final level, we have Deploy. You get a charge zombie, and Slay, you get a charge zombie. And it's a 6/16. This is another one of those cards that I feel like is kind of more of a pawn than a build around.
Yep.
The Slay is a little tricky to get off the first time because he has such a low attack, and then it becomes more difficult later on, right? Because they're not going to play creatures opposite it. It does have a nice health bonus to it. Like it's got decent health, so it can stick around. And the potent zombie is not like it's nothing to scoff at, right? It's a 3/5. You can it can take a hit. You could sack it to buff up Necrolord to make it more likely to slay and re-trigger. So, it's a little hard to get going, but I feel like it's a decent enough card. Like I wouldn't be unhappy to have this in my deck. But what's your thoughts on it?
I do think the first thing is it's interesting that it's a mage. I think that there's definitely some like mage synergy that might be able to help you in Tempest if you have it in the right build. Because you get power buffs and some of the Tempest power things, and plus if you have something like a Conflagrate like that or Conflagrate that could help a bunch. But that being said, like I've only played this a few times and it was all in a sealed situation, and like I've just never been able to get the enough damage with the ability to even slay at level 1. And then it's like typically I found that other cards in my deck were more powerful. But I guess if I have a deck that builds around it a little more, maybe it's incidentally in there and I could just drop it to get like a charge zombie. Like, it's not horrible. It's just like, in the situations where I played it, it just wasn't as value. Like, in general, most of the Slay cards don't get as much value as I would hope. Because I look at the ability, I'm like, this is great. And then it's just like, I can't get the Slays when I want them. And it's just like, the cards don't line up the way I would hope. And then it's just like, man, maybe it's not worth it. And then I look for
Slay
deck.
is not the same as Activate, right? You don't get to do it every time you want to. So it's really hard to build a deck around this, but I can see it being fairly strong in like a Tempest build or a Utera build where you're buffing attack and health at the same time. And you can slay over multiple turns, or at least make it big enough that it's a threat. It's also the zombies that it makes are good, like death triggering, because you can choose when to activate them, kind of like Portal Shade, right? So you can get those bonuses. But, again, I don't know how much of a build around this is. I don't have one myself, but I've seen it played a couple times. But it's hard to get it going in sort of a competitive meta.
I will say, if I'm not mistaken, this might be one of the cards that Fletch told me that he was surprised sees less play than expected. Like, I think he was like, this was one that, like, I think maybe tested very well and one that they still enjoy playing in dev. And, like, I'm 90% sure, and that's something that I'll validate. And if I'm wrong, I'll post in the comments on the video.
Yeah.
I'll be like, oh, that wasn't the card, but, like, I feel like I remember this specific thing me and him had a conversation about. And I was just like, interesting. Maybe I need to look at Necrolord Yorick
Yeah.
more.
I think in development they play much. The decks they play are too fair.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't think. I think in competitive in the meta that things are just too optimized and have much more removal and specific strategies going on. That there's just it kind of pushes out cards like this, right? So definitely a good sealed card. I think it could be a good sealed card if you have the right pairing with like some attack buff things. Because I think getting these extra bodies is really strong, especially since you can sack them to like buff your other creatures. So,
Hmm.
but that's still theory. Like I haven't actually had the chance to play with it that much. So,
Yeah.
we'd have to see how it really plays out. And you said that you've played it in sealed, but never really got it off. So,
Yeah.
but
I will confirm that this is the card that Fletch said because I looked at it for our conversation, and what he told me in there was like the meta right now is just too removal heavy, which is why it's kind of just so suppressed. Which I agree with 100%.
yeah, for sure. So that brings us to our last one. So let's talk about Ceruzal the Deceiver.
Yeah. Do you want me to take this one, or
Yeah,
do you
let's
want to
take
take
this
it?
last one. Yeah.
All right. So Cerazal the Deceiver is a 3/6 mage with deploy, play Night Aspect. So Night Aspect is your creatures in this lane have stealth. Now, level 2 Cerazal is 4/8. If you deal damage to the enemy player with another creature, you may transform Night Aspect and put it into one of your empty lanes. So when you transform Night Aspect, it becomes Night Apotheosis. It's a 10/8 stealth. If this would be destroyed, transform it and put it into one of your lanes without an exalt. Now, finally, the level 3 Cesaral is a 5/12. Deploy, you may transform Night Aspect and put it into one of your empty lanes. So this is a card that I immediately undervalued when I first saw it. Because again, like a lot of these where it's like you deploy and you immediately just play your Exalt, like I was just like, I don't know how good this is going to be because it was just Exalts were brand new. I would argue myself that this is one of the top soul binds, in my opinion, in the full set. It's one that I feel like pairs very, very well with Nova Elementalist and Rumble Spark. I know Cardboard Nude actually played a deck with both of these, and I've seen more than most Eli play as well with both Nova and Cesarol. And being able to give something stealth, just in general, is very strong because it's like a lot of times your stealth creatures will kind of have a little bit of a limit to how much power they have. But if you put like a big body in a lane that just automatically gives stealth, it's like every other turn, unless your opponent has removal or aggressive, they're likely not going to be able to block and they'll just be taking the damage. So just that alone is really, really good with Rumble Spark because it's like you play spells, gain attack, and then it's very hard to remove already. Now let's give it stealth and they can't even chump block that 20 damage that's about to come at them. So it's like alone that's really strong. Now the part that's really interesting as well is that the what's it called? Cesarol level 2 acts very interesting with Darkheart, with the actual Night Aspect itself. So this is a static ability that's on Cesarol itself. So if you would deal damage to the enemy player with another creature, you may transform Night Aspect and put it into one of your empty lanes. So if you actually have Night Apotheosis on the board already, so let's say you've had this out before, you have the Night Apotheosis out, it dies in combat, it will automatically flip back into an Exalt side of the batch because that's what happens when basically one of the Exalt's creatures is killed. And then Cesarol, as long as it's on the board after combat, will immediately flip it back. So it's just like one of those things where if you have a Darkheart out, deal damage with Darkheart, you could automatically flip your Night Aspect. If it dies in combat with Cesarol out, you could flip it back over. So it's like a lot of times when a deck has a lot of threats, you might not really prioritize killing this 4/8 that's not dealing too much to you. And then as soon as like you get to a point where it's just like, uh-oh, now this is going to be a problem. Now Night Apotheosis is going to be out on the board a ton and just be a big stealth body that I have to deal with. I've just seen this be a very, very strong card. So kind of after all of that, what are your thoughts on this card?
Yeah. So this is an interesting card where sometimes the Exalt is actually better than the creature.
I agree.
Where because you're giving anything stealth, like there are certain cards that you just want to get through, and the fact that you can kind of play this, like even if you play the level 1 Cerazal as an underdrop, the night aspect is still pretty relevant. And there are going to be situations where you don't even want to flip it, even though you did the damage. Like it's a May ability, right, to do the
Yeah.
transformation. So I think that's very interesting. And like you said, with the way the batching works, you deal damage, you trigger this. If it's back to night aspect, it'll flip over again because it's going to look for night aspect after the ability resolves, right? So
Mhm.
the level 2 is actually probably more beneficial than the level 3, since the level 3
I'd
is
agree.
like one and done, and it doesn't have that static ability anymore, which also makes it kind of interesting as like a Stitcher target to bring this version back and try and keep it
Yeah.
protected. Um, I think it's just a solid card. I mean, I don't think it's as strong as Rumble Spark, right? Because it doesn't have that infinite
No.
ability to transform. Like once the Cerazal's gone, it's kind of done. But a 10 power stealth creature is, I mean, that's, you can't take very many hits from that before you're done, just dead. So it's definitely like a very big threat. Like the apotheosis is a big threat, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I like it. I wish I had one. I don't have one of these yet. So um,
I think I have like one or two. It's one
mhm.
that I just did not open a lot of. I've opened so many Chanting of the Abysses and like very few of Caesarol, and I was just like, ugh, I wish it was the other way around.
Yeah, the one I keep opening is Goliath. So
Okay.
yeah, I opened that and Soltar a bunch. But yeah, I mean, I think this card is pretty strong. It's definitely probably the best Nekrium
Yeah,
Soulbind for sure.
I would
At
agree.
least in terms of like build around and just the amount of impact it can have on the game. So this is definitely one that you should keep your eye out on. Um,
100%. I feel like this is also a card that, like, as more sets come out, this is gonna just get stronger and stronger because there's gonna be like other big cards like Glorfglob, like interesting on its own. Give it stealth, uh oh.
yeah,
like
exactly. Or
like
yeah,
yeah, so I feel like this is just one of those cards that like will age well, just being able to give cards stealth that normally wouldn't.
exactly. Yeah, and it's not level gated or anything, so that's nice too.
No.
Yeah. All right, so that is the last of our soul binds. So let's go ahead and wrap things up. So, what's your overall impression? How do you think Necrium fared compared to set one?
So I feel like from a card design standpoint, there is a lot of more unique cards in my opinion in set two Necrom
Hmm.
than set one. I would feel like I kind of have a similar feeling in Terra where I feel like it's just not as competitive in most cases where it's
Hmm.
like I feel like you could build a lot of really fun decks, a lot of really cool decks, but specifically cards that are exclusive to set two, I would say are at least a tier under in most cases power level than set one Necrom because like there was some really really good cards in set one, but
Yeah,
I still feel like it's a lot of fun to play, and it's something that I need to delve into more because I feel like my set one stuff a lot of times I like focus there, so I don't play as much of my set two Necrom, and I think that's kind of like I'm doing myself a disservice because there's a lot of really fun cards. Even going through some of these, I'm like, oh, maybe I need to play these more.
yeah, yeah. So, like, I kind of the same feeling. I think part of that is because of how overtuned life gain was in alpha.
Yeah.
You don't have as much life gain going on in set two in Whitefang with Nekrium, and there's not really any. There aren't many, if any, payoffs for the life gain. It's just drain, and all the payoffs are still in Utera only.
Hmm.
Whereas with in set one, you had things like Thoras Will and a couple other cards that could benefit from the life gain that you're getting.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of why it falls a little short compared
Makes
to set one. But I think in more like I think in terms of like the Utera Nekrium pairing, it definitely falls down. But I think it might be actually a little bit more better and like more aggressive decks. I think it's got a lot more aggression in set two. So I think it pairs a little bit better with Tempest in set two than
you can see
it did
it.
in set one. But again, it doesn't have as much free stuff as set one. You lose Blight Witch, you lost Zeraswil, you lost Cersei's Call. So a lot of what made it strong in set one is missing, kind of like with Utera, where you lost Mantis and Forge Seal. Like it's really those powerhouses here you lost some of those really good free plays, Discient Siphon and that kind of stuff that just lets you get all this extra value that just kind of isn't there with set 2. So but I still think there's a lot of really cool cards and I have a lot of fun with it.
Oh, I agree.
So
I will
definitely worth
say I
getting.
cannot believe that Darkheart made its way from set 1 into set 2. Because I know they took out stuff like Blight Witch. They took out like Spite Maiden's in there. What was the other card that they took out that I'm thinking of off the top of my tongue? There's quite a few, but Blight Witch I
The
think was the
Summoner.
big one for me.
Summoner they took out.
Summoner, yeah,
Yeah.
Summoner was the one. And basically we kept Darkheart, which I was very surprised about. We also kept Shambler, even though we lost Shambling as a
Yeah.
modifier word. But I guess what I will say is it's just like there's a few of the set 2 exclusive cards which I would feel like are more dead than some of the set 1 cards that are like you know what I mean? Like in general, like I like Butcher, but it's something that like I'm usually not like, oh man, I love having a Butcher in my deck. Like I would almost rather kind of have just a set 1 deck instead of pulling Butcher into my list because of
Right.
the Slay. And it's like I think just with what I'm doing in Necrum, I don't necessarily care as much about the Slay because they're usually not going to go off. And
Yeah.
I think for me, that's what kind of does it. Because it's like, Slay is cool. I feel like trying to find ways to do it is fun. But if I'm going to try to like play at a competitive table, it's just like, I don't care about Slay as much because like I want abilities that I could guarantee are going to go off when I want them to, as printed on the card.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in agreement. It's that there's yeah, some of the exalts and the Slay is just not quite geared towards what the competitive meta has been doing, but maybe that'll change in
Yeah,
set 3.
I hope that we also have events that are kind of like not like standard, but it's like we have like a block constructed or a set constructed as well. So it's like
Yeah, that
maybe
could
I'll
be
start
fun.
running some of those. Like maybe what I'll do is try to start running like every other week or something like that, a set 2 constructed tournament leading up
Yeah, I
to
love
set
that.
3.
That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, because it'll kind of force us to explore some decks that we haven't already, and it will also like pull out some of these like Drix rallying or like some of these things that are just like really strong that we don't really see as much
Yeah,
anymore in set 2.
yeah, for sure. So, what's your favorite card that we got to review today,
Ooh,
or
that
modifier? Or
I would say, in terms of name, Glorf Glob is one of my favorite cards to say. Like, I'll usually try to work it into a conversation whenever I can. But I would say probably in terms of my favorite card here, it's probably comes down to between General Zareth or Cesarol.
Mhm.
Cesarol is probably a little more exciting for me. But I would say, yeah, they're kind of like a 1A, 1P for me. How about you?
um, I think I probably should have thought about this more before I asked the question. Um, I actually am really partial to Devour Soul. I have a deck that I've been playing with it and I've really enjoyed it. It just kind of scratches it's a really fun spells payoff card. Um, so I think that's kind of my favorite Soulbind right now. I also really like the Doom modifier. I think that's a really cool one.
Yes,
Even though I haven't been able to play with it a lot, I think it's just a really cool one.
I
Um,
agree. That's a really good point.
so
But you're gonna have to play that deck against me though, because like I really want
the
to
Devour
see
Soul
how
one.
good Devour Soul is. Yeah,
Okay. Maybe after this, if we have time before
yeah,
bed. But speaking of that, maybe it's time. I think it's probably time to wrap up. So,
yeah.
to the listeners, what are your thoughts on Nekrium and Whitefang Pass? Do you agree or disagree with our assessments of the cards? Please leave a comment below. Thanks again, Sam, for joining me tonight. If you want to go ahead and let us, how can people find you again?
Yeah, so you can find me on both Twitch and YouTube at Nathas Gaming, Nathas, and then gaming. I mean, you could also find me on Discord as Nathas in any of the Discords. So, yeah.
Awesome. So, with that, we're going to go ahead and sign off. If you guys could give a like and subscribe to the channel, you can find out the next time one of these pops up. This is the last of this series, but we'll also be doing a mini episode on the new Forgeborn abilities, and there'll be other stuff coming on for Metasight in the future. So, with that, have a good night.
Have a good one, guys.